Change the world together. Ideology. CWT. The world today. The Earth and humankind are being held hostage to the political and financial system. This system protects the interest of financial elites and is bitterly unfair towards people and destructive towards nature. This system is based on the colonization and exploitation of people, states, energy, minerals, and technologies. The way global capital is being exploited is at the root of religious conflicts between people and communities. For centuries, the financial system has been taking control of the world's resources and markets and influenced governments, mass media, education, medicine, and even our food supply. A few of the world's richest families and their corporations exert direct control over the scope of all major human activity. How could this happen? To answer this question, let's turn to history. The history of money extends back over thousands of years. At the dawn of the human civilization, when there was no money, only hard work could give you clothing, shelter, and food. Over time, the main human occupations, gathering and hunting, moved to the next level, and our ancestors could raise cattle and grow their own food. As a result, a surplus of goods and produce started to appear. A tribe which had a large number of animal skins but short of grain could exchange with another tribe that had a surplus of grain. This is how bartering started. As humans developed, the barter also developed and covered an even greater number of goods and services. The most famous example of bartering in human history is the bargain of Peter Minuit in 1626. For trinkets and beads costing $24, he obtained the island of Manhattan. In 1993, the island was valued at $50 billion. Gradually, people realized that carrying a bag of wheat or dozens of skins for exchange was not very convenient. By trial and error, humans began using silver and gold as an equivalent for exchange. Gold and silver could not be faked or spoil, so they served as money for a long time. Jewelers began minting gold and silver coins. They needed a reliable storage for gold and silver, ushering in the first safes. Soon, traders and the general population began to rent space in the jewelers' safes to store their coins and valuables. So long before credit existed, jewelers began to lease shelves in their safes, earning income from that business. Years later, one jeweler began to understand that people never came for their gold all at once. This occurs because people were holding on to obligatory bills given by the jeweler as a proof of the stored gold. These bills were considered real money in the market, instead of the gold, as it was more convenient and easy to exchange. Sellers of goods accepted them as receipts for payment of goods. Borrowers began to take loans in this paper form instead of real gold. The jeweler came up with another business. He started to lend his gold at an interest. He used his own and the stored gold of the merchants and townspeople, who kept it for safekeeping. But since everyone never comes at the same time, this business grew rapidly. The ability to give loans was limited only by the amount of gold in the safe. Then the bankers came up with an even more daring idea. Since they were the only ones who knew how much gold was in the safe, they could issue obligatory bills for gold that they didn't have. If all the investors would never come at the same time to collect, then who would find out? They figured out how to make money out of thin air. This was the origin of the phrase "to make money out of thin air." Jewelers who realized how to make money out of thin air are today's bankers. That principle became the ground of the existing financial system that began to take shape about 400 years ago. Bankers began to lend to governments, who used that money to wage wars of conquest, and to merchants, who conducted business by exploiting new territories. Since the governments depended on the bank's money, they not only allowed them to make money out of thin air, but also legitimized this process by skewing the ratio, making it 9-to-1. Today, this works in most of the world's banks and accepted as a part of the banking philosophy. For example, if you deposit $1,000 into an account, the bank can then turn around and lend someone else $10,000 in the form of credit, based on this fractional reserve system, legally creating money out of thin air. State fraud. The first major state endorsement of this financial fraud was the Bank of England in 1694. That institution was a result of the so-called transaction between a nearly bankrupt government and a group of financiers. The bank was private, and so the state gave it the official title and the right to issue money. The King of England was in great need of money for the war with France and willingly agreed to give the bankers this national title and get the loans he needed. In the 1690s, the banking system of England included lending bankers who provided loans out of borrowed funds and jewelers receiving gold for deposits and extending loans as well. Bankers realized that the power over money might well result in unlimited opportunities. In a couple of centuries, the British Empire became a leading world power due to the relentless colonization of other peoples and continents. In 1913, the next leader emerged, surpassing the Bank of England in the scale and scope of using this fraudulent system. This was the Federal Reserve of the United States. But the Federal Reserve was not a governmental organization. It was a private enterprise made up of bankers, a joint stock company established by 12 Federal Reserve banks, which, in turn, had been created by commercial banks. The Fed operates as a private bank. The US government issues bonds to procure the national currency, and the Fed prints banknotes and lends them to the state through the sale of the bonds. The state buys the bonds and the money returns to the Fed with interest. Thus, the main objective of the Fed was its income through seigniorage, the difference between the face value of the banknotes and the cost of their production. For example, if a $100 banknote costs 10 cents to make, the seigniorage will be $99.90. Like the Bank of England, the Fed is not part of the state. The third US President Thomas Jefferson said, "Banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies." If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will develop around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless in the country their fathers built. Deception, fraud, and racketeering are the modus operandi of the bankers. You've heard of names like Rothschild and Rockefeller. What do they have in common? They both became rich and powerful using these unfair and corrupt methods, and the law never stopped them as they achieved their goals. During the Great Anglo-French Battle of Waterloo in 1815, the London Stock Exchange was thrown into disorder. If Napoleon won, the market would be ruined, but if he lost, the market would be enriched. Rothschild saw this battle as an opportunity to make a fortune for himself. Using messenger pigeons and signals from boats along the English Channel, he was the first to learn that Napoleon lost. He quickly spread false information that Napoleon had won to the London Stock Exchange. He started selling his shares with others following him, and the price of securities went spiraling down. Rothschild and his partners, knowing that England had actually won, bought all the shares for a pittance. A day later, when the London Stock Exchange learned about the victory of England, those shares skyrocketed and were worth a fortune. Nathan Rothschild earned £40 million on this information flip. This fraud went down in history as one of many examples showing the impropriety bankers and their principles. Rothschild was a great deceiver. However, Rockefeller often used openly criminal methods for doing business, ruining businesses of his competitors. His criminal infamy reached such a level that mothers used his name to frighten their misbehaving children. The ability to print money without constraint is the dream of any financier, allowing him or her to print as much as he desires. This large supply of money was used to seize the treasures and resources of others from around the world. Millions were robbed of the opportunity to share the wealth of the world. The Federal Reserve engaged in bribing politicians, taking over competition, and buying entire governments in order to strengthen its position. And in order to protect its position, it financed the world's strongest army, that of the United States of America. What does an ambitious entrepreneur do if he can obtain a surplus of money. He expands his business, and that is what the bankers did. In order to increase their earnings, they began to give out loans. This also began to happen on a governmental level, giving out massive loans to build up armies through the sale of arms and pitting one country against the other. This led to the destruction of countries, which gave the banks the opportunity to turn around and begin giving loans for the rebuilding of these countries, and the cycle repeated itself. The First and Second World Wars were examples of this scenario. Shortly after the Fed was established, the First World War began. It culminated in the collapse of two currencies secured with gold, the Russian ruble and the German mark. However, many American businessmen opposed the bankers and realized the real motives of the financial robber barons. In 1929, the Great Depression began. The discount rate of the Fed suddenly increased, and almost half the money supply was withdrawn from the economy, making the credit costs skyrocket. Companies that relied on credit went bankrupt, and the regular investors' lives were ruined by the gratuitous consumer loans. Securities were not worth a penny, and millions of people became unemployed and idle. Some people flaunt the idea that during the Depression, in the United States, all of the country's assets were lost. But this is not what happened. When someone loses value, another receives it. The well-kept secret is who had bought those assets. Those who control the Fed bought them. The same people who organized the economic depression with the help of the Fed. In 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected President of the United States. He began fighting the crisis. US citizens were no longer allowed to possess precious metals and had to hand them over to the authorized banks, or the owner would face a prison sentence. Soon after the expropriation, the price of gold went up significantly. At the same time, American industry was being procured by the bank clans and the Fed. This was not only about saving American industry. Not everybody kept silent. Congressman and banker from Pennsylvania, Louis McFadden, gave a famous speech that exposed the Great Depression. In a highlight, he said, "It was no accident. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here, so they might emerge as the rulers of us all." In 1936, the politician suddenly died at the age of 50. World War II made the United States the world's richest country. Investments in the construction plans of the Third Reich were successful. The list of American backers of Hitler included names like Rockefeller and Morgan. In the summer of 1929, at a special meeting of bankers, representatives of the Morgan Financial and Industrial Group acknowledged the need to support the German Nazi movement. At the end of the war, in 1944, all states signed the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made the dollar the only legitimate global reserve currency. Since 1944, these green papers, printed by a private organization and unsecured, were supposed to be used for all the settlements and storage of foreign exchange reserves. However, the US suddenly experienced problems. The young and charismatic President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a representative of a large Irish clan, started a crusade against the Fed. In his speech about the secret societies, the president called for the construction of an alternative power system. The government began emission of banknotes, secured with precious metals, through the Ministry of Finance under the Presidential Decree number 11110. Those dollars were endorsed under the name United States Note, not Federal Reserve Note. That is, they were reprinted and endorsed by the state, not a private entity. They were secure. 6 months later, Kennedy was killed. Then his brother Robert was also killed. Some believe for knowing more than he should. The Kennedy Rebellion was suppressed. Banknotes were withdrawn. Now the $2 and $5 bills of 1963 are rare. As president, John Kennedy felt like a puppet of the Fed, and he didn't like it. And thus, Kennedy fought for the interests of the American people, and actually tried to make a coup d'etat from above. There remained a detail that got in the way of the bankers' ultimate objective. This was the problem of Bretton Woods and the issuing of money. Remember that money had a gold equivalent and could be exchanged for gold under the Bretton Woods Agreement at any time. However, the bankers had printed 1,000 times the amount of money that they had gold in stock. But the bankers were legally obliged to make such an exchange if demanded. If all the bank customers came at the same time, requiring the exchange of money for gold, their system would collapse there and then. So they decided to change this obstructive law with the help of the then President of the United States, Richard Nixon. He implemented a series of economic reforms in 1971 known as the Nixon Shock. The most significant reform was the refusal of the US to secure the dollar rate with a gold equivalent, which resulted in a virtual collapse of the Bretton Woods system. The bankers were now free to produce as much paper money as they needed. Money truly became paper, as the Nixon decision gave the dollar note a value which was not backed by anything. The way to organize and control crisis. The same banking system caused the mortgage crisis of 2007-2008, which gave hundreds of thousands of US households to the banks. A huge number of Americans were unable to pay their financial obligations to the bank. The banks took the debtors' houses and put them up for sale. Why had lots of Americans suddenly become insolvent? The reason is that the creditors gave loans to questionable borrowers who defaulted on those loans. This play started in 2001. The bankers began to give money to all takers. They were considerable amounts, as it was for real estate purchases. Some banks offered loans with a floating interest rate, adjusted yearly from the start of the third year. At the beginning, the rate was unusually low. Others advertised loans that pushed even the first payment for a new house into the future. No first payment or security was needed. The seductive conditions that they offered Americans were tempting to those who were not even considering buying real estate. Everybody began to take loans trying to improve their living conditions. People who had no money took out loans from institutions who also had no money, but borrowed and raised the funds in order to loan them out under this scheme. One debt caused another one. Debt was everywhere. But the system of selling debt had its industrial logic. The sale of mortgage bonds and loans was performed like this. The rating agencies assessed the degree of credit non-repayment risk, and depending on that degree, the securities had various degrees of freshness. Extra grade and grade 1 were more expensive but had less risk and found their buyers quickly. However, second and third grade ratings were also quite popular. The price of the risky mortgage package was low and had a large demand. Everybody was satisfied. Banks ended contracts with private persons, got its money from investors, and could start the affair again. Investors had donated and were waiting for profits as skeptical yet willing customers could apply for loans again. The hilarity of the situation was that investors or speculators who bought cheap second-rate mortgage obligations on the so-called scientific basis propagated by rating agencies divided them into more grades. This time, the highest grade, reliability rating, was not the best of the best, but the best of the worst. This went on for 6 to 7 years. The US economy was growing, GDP was increasing, everyone was happy. Many people were not only kept occupied, but also made large amounts of money, but produced nothing. This debt pyramid was supported with constant growth of real estate prices, which enabled attraction of new players with new financial resources to the housing and mortgage market. Banks, major reputable companies with many years or even a century or two of operation, started the same game. Let's call it, give everybody as much of your money as you can. This resulted in filled postal boxes, but no prospectuses of some productive and beneficial business opportunity, only thick envelopes with bank contracts. Each envelope contained a credit card. Its activation required nothing. Just take it and start to buy. The agreement was straightforward and endorsed by the bank. Real money has been sent out by mail, carelessly, to everyone en masse. The logic of this mailing system was straightforward: mass non-payment of debt on credit cards. The US Fed data stated the cumulative plastic debt of Americans amounting to approximately $950 billion at the beginning of November 2008. According to Moody's, the rate of non-performing card loans increased from 4.61% to 6.82% from August 2007 to August 2008, which is a growth amounting to a 48% increase. Withdrawals from credit cards during the period of unemployment had shot up to truly historic proportions. The existing policy had become impossible, as the credit system with its low lending rate had been made so large that their repayment was impossible. The consequences of the US bank games were made visible for all to see. This brings to mind the statement that US President Woodrow Wilson had once made: "We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government ruled by the opinion and the duress of a small group of dominant men." His statement is not only meant for the US. The Arabs traded oil for dollars, the Germans sold machines and equipment for marks, now replaced by the euro, the Chinese manufactured for yuan. Until today, no one seems ready to fight against this system in the United States, although everyone understands that the Fed is robbing the world, creating virtual money at the expense of our benefit, instead of legitimate material resources. Key areas of life and forms of control. It has become common knowledge that the world's elite and the bankers profit and benefit from the crises that befall ordinary populations around the world. How else do they implement their control and plans on populations? This is a product of their control on the world's energy reserves, food supplies, health systems, education, and social media. Energy and oil. The dependence of humankind on oil and gas and coal corporations ensures massive profits for those at the top of the financial system. The group of energy companies led by BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Royal Dutch Shell, and the OPEC cartel and national oil producers control about 88% of the world's energy reserves and its production and sale. Do you think they want to see the petrol-driven car replaced with the electric car? This is one of the reasons that alternative energy sources are yet to become mainstream and replace the destructive use of fossil fuels. There is a strong incentive for those driven by profit to continue the dependence on oil for as long as possible, disregarding the effect this has on the environment. Free energy will put these corporations out of business, and therefore it is a matter of survival for them to fight this change, even if it puts the survival of our ecosystem in jeopardy. Petrodollars are at the root of power in today's world. Food products. Derivatives of oil are being used in many of the world's vital products. In the agricultural sector, they are used for fertilizers and herbicides to control food production. Agriculture has paid large sums to the oil and gas giants through the purchase of these products. But when you realize that the same bankers are behind big agriculture as well as big oil, then the picture becomes clearer. Governments pay billions of dollars in subsidies to these companies, and yet their promise to end hunger has fallen short, very short. Toxic chemicals are poisoning people and wildlife, polluting soil and water, and producing harmful food that poses a serious threat to our health. Monsanto, DuPont, Cargill, ADM, Glencore are the global agriculture giants. They produce genetically modified products at the seed level, creating all sorts of undefined complications to the human body. This unnecessary invasion on the human body is destroying our immune system, and the rise of cancer rates around the world is a case in point. We have also seen a rise in infertility, which scientists believe is related to these modified products. Not only are these corporations ruining our health by degrading our food supply, they are also destroying the livelihood of the farmers that would otherwise supply us with natural organic produce. The farmers cannot compete with the corporate giants and are forced to purchase the modified seeds to survive. These seeds can only be planted once and will not produce more seeds, as per the natural cycle. The seed has been modified and made sterile, so the farmer returns to buy more from the corporations. This is how the profit incentive has colonized and exploited our food supply. So, two key areas, energy and food, are controlled by the same elite banking families and the corporations that represent them. The destruction is obvious today as the geopolitical wars driven by resource shortages wage on, and the GMO debacle still continues unabated. But that's not all the trouble. Medicine. Medicine is also under the control of these international bankers and their corporations. The health system has been controlled by a network of pharmaceutical companies who have strong incentive to produce and sell as many drugs as possible. It's how they succeed in the financial system. They fund medical education, medical studies, and results are always in their favor, not for the benefit of those who need the healthcare. Doctors profit from selling specific medicines, and they are trained at the expense of big pharma companies. Medicine seems to be designed not to eliminate the disease, but only to relieve the symptoms and prolong the disease so more medicine can be sold. The pharmaceutical industry controls our society. Its interests control medical researchers and make all professions related to healthcare dependent on it. Pharmaceutical companies manipulate the law and mass media in order to preserve and protect their dominant position. Mass media large-scale advertising campaigns create a smokescreen and hide the true interests of the pharmaceutical industry. The advertising statements of pharmaceutical industry falsely claim the destruction of infectious diseases. In fact, the most important therapeutic drugs, such as penicillin and other antibiotics, were invented in institutions funded by government. The pharmaceutical industry is also trying to prevent the dissemination of information about vitamins, knowing that, in this case, the lifetimes of millions of people will be extended by several decades. Revenues from pharmaceutical companies over the past 25 years exceeded the revenues of all the other industries on average by 500%. In other words, the disease business is the most profitable business in the world, and millions of people pay the bills directly or indirectly. What should we do? The most important way to change the situation is that we should not only reveal but also participate in the creation of a new healthcare system. Healthy aging should be the rule rather than the exception. Pharmaceutical giants such as Novartis, Pfizer, Roche, Sanofi, and others carry out a lot of scientific investigations, but they are not transparent about the extent of these investigations. There is a strong evidence that pharmaceutical companies are creating some of the diseases that they also create cures for, all in the name of more profit. They invest in the future by creating the problem and the solution simultaneously. Are they using human beings for their experiments? Are they engaged in the sterilization of people through their questionable vaccines? We already know that they are creating biological weapons for warfare, commissioned by the military-industrial complex, and all underwritten and controlled by the same bankers. This puts all of the medical industry in question on whether it is really benefiting humankind at all. We see the systematic legalization of harmful drugs and chemical psychotropic substances all over the world. Children are being prescribed harmful substances for fictitious diseases. Do you still think that the power players value the health of the human populace? Science and education. Science and education is also under the control of the financial system today. What do bankers and their corporations want from schools? They want to indoctrinate our minds from the start to produce an obedient and docile workforce which is easily controlled. The school follows curriculums set by authorities and keep us bound to the system for many years until we become submissive to this hierarchical system. It is apparent that the bankers do not want to see an educated populace. The quality of public education has been steadily declining, and the ability of people to think differently has been stunted. It is much harder to control a man or a woman who thinks critically and can look at things from different perspectives. They want us to turn into robots who obey and consume on demand. The scientific establishment has also been subjugated to the will of these elites. The funding of science has been primarily channeled into areas that do not create the most value for humankind. This is evident in the slow adoption of the renewables industry. In other sectors such as transportation, education, and health. The unlimited capital and the control of the few has been set against the benefits of the many. Do you want to live in such a world? People's main purpose under this system is to survive, not prosper. It has become a modern form of slavery, driven by the financial elite. They've created a system to control people's minds. We work to pay back debts, loans with high interest, and to afford to send our children to schools. All this is for the benefit of a few and their exorbitant lifestyles. This system looks like a pyramid separated into divisions, with ordinary people making up the bottom level. This is the economic term of the bottom of the pyramid, where most of those living in poverty are categorized. The next level is where we have government workers and those that benefit at the expense of the masses through tax collection. At the next level, we have the corporations who influence government and control much of our social behavior. The next level is where the big banks and various financial institutions sit, and it is run by the financial elite that control the corporations. At the high tip of the pyramid are the 300 richest families that influence and control all that is below them. Researchers from Zurich have analyzed the data of 40 million companies from 200 countries around the world and came to a disappointing conclusion. About 80% of all the global funds and companies are concentrated within 150 transnational corporations, consisting of banks, investment funds, and insurance companies that are controlled by a very small group of people. Many experts believe that a world government is already acting through the institutions it has created. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization lead the list. They believe that a totalitarian world power is being formed, a military dictatorship led by a fringe elite, possessing everything and setting all the rules. We can already see this elite seeking to control access to almost all the resources we need to live. One of the goals of this clandestine organization is to create what is known as the Golden Billion. This Golden Billion includes 24 countries that represent the worthiest of the developed nations. About 900 million people from these countries have been assigned the role of service in mining, and the other 6 billion are classified as unnecessary and systematically destroyed by the means of harmful substances, viruses, wars, and government injustice. The story of the disadvantaged people. In most of the cities in India, people live in slums and cardboard boxes on the streets. They work as servants for the wealthy people or hold low-wage jobs. These are the disadvantaged people, perceived by the rest of the world as the people in need. More affluent citizens pass these slums on their way to and from work and try to ignore the situation and plight of these disadvantaged people. The people in need themselves have become resigned to their predicament and accept it as their destiny. Most of them do not consider it necessary to change these conditions. It makes no sense for them to fight the unfair conditions they were born into. When we look at disadvantaged people, we consider ourselves successful and lucky by comparison. After all, we live in comfortable conditions, receive good education, and many of us have prestigious, high-paying jobs. We have loved ones around us, and we feel that we have advantages in life. However, we are also disadvantaged people for those who live better than we do, compared to the world's financial elite. For them, we are also second-class citizens who live pitiful lives while they spend fortunes on extravagant luxury. There is an obvious injustice that exists. We understand that we are being manipulated and deceived. Our hard work is used to get the wealthiest of us even richer, and we must be content with little. What have we done to change this? Almost nothing. This unjust world will be passed on to our children and grandchildren, and they will continue to live in the same way as we do. Generations and generations will replace each other without changing anything. But is this right? No. I suggest stopping this cycle of injustice in the world, and to change our lives for the better would change the world together. Money and authority have merged under this corrupt system. Their power stems from this unity, a secret held by those in power since time immemorial. Those in power follow the divide and emperor, or divide and rule principle. This allows them to continue their control by wearing down the forces that try and hamper their plans. The problems we face today are the result of our inaction. Taking the wait-and-see approach, we enable these controllers to define our future and the future of our children. Change will not come by itself. We must combine our efforts. If we unite, we can do much more. Together, we can change the world. Dollar and politics. It is clear that these bubbles and the buying up of the world for dollars has given the world's elite almost unlimited financial and administrative power and resources. This will continue as the world plays by the rules of these robber barons. Charles de Gaulle, the first knight for humanity against the dollar in the 20th century. The US wish for sole control over the global foreign exchange market was transmitted to all the countries during the Second World War. In April 1943, American experts launched the Global Monetary System scheme. World War II was in full swing. Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and other participants in the anti-Hitler coalition had to pay America gold for delivery of arms, machinery, metals and food. Conventional banknotes were worth almost nothing in wartime. The dollar had become the equivalent of precious metals, and the gold standard was pegged to the dollar. Here are some figures. The gold reserve of the United States was 13,000 tons in 1938, 17,700 tons in 1945, 21,800 tons in 1949. That was 70% of the world gold reserve at that time. On February the 4th, 1965, the President of France, Charles de Gaulle, told journalists at his regular briefing at the Aleksey Palace, "Truly, it is hard to imagine any standard other than gold. The international exchange has the highest law, the golden rule, which is to be restored. It is an obligation to provide balance of payments for various currencies by actual revenue and expenditure of gold." After the creator of the Fifth Republic stopped talking, the press representatives rushed out of the hall to nearby telephone sets. Everyone understood that a war had been officially declared, a war against the US dollar. De Gaulle proposed not to accept the post-war world financial redistribution in favor of the dollar as the main currency. He called back to the international payment system, effective before the world wars. In other words, he proposed to bring back the classical gold standard where every currency had real value and was literally worth that value in gold. De Gaulle did not intend to bring back the gold standard, which would ensure the stability of the global financial system. Quite the contrary, he was proposing a return to the role of gold as the general equivalent. Americans were torn between the Vietnam War and problems in the Caribbean. They hoped that the anti-dollar rhetoric of the French leader would remain just words. However, it did not go that way. A secret report by famous economists Robert Triffin and Jacques Rueff, prepared in 1959, informed General de Gaulle that the forced participation of France in the so-called gold pool was ruining the economy. The international structure of the central banks of 7 Western European countries under the auspices of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which included France, were acting through the Bank of England. It was not only keeping the international price of gold at $35 per ounce, 1 ounce is equal to approximately 31 grams, for the convenience of Washington, but was also trading the gold for their benefit and reporting monthly to the US financial authorities. If they had to increase the selling volume of the metal, the pool participants gave the Americans the gold from their reserves. If the pool brought more than sold, the difference was shared at a humiliating ratio. Half was given to the Americans, half to the others. France had 9%. Experts reported to de Gaulle that the activities of the gold pool had caused over $3 billion in loss to the Europeans. General de Gaulle knew he irritated the US government, particularly after France had accelerated development of its own nuclear weapons program in the early 1960s. In January of 1963, de Gaulle rejected the multilateral nuclear force created by the Pentagon and took back the control of the Atlantic Fleet of France from NATO. By that time, only 2 French divisions remained under the American command instead of the 14 that were agreed on. However, the Americans never guessed that this was just the beginning. In 1965, de Gaulle formally proposed to his American counterpart Lyndon Johnson $1.5 billion in cash from the French state reserves to be exchanged for gold. Washington responded that the US would regard such an action by France as unfriendly and would have consequences. Politics is too serious a matter to be left to the politicians, retorted the general, and announced that France was walking out on NATO. In spring of 1965, a French ship anchored in New York Harbor. It was not a combat vessel, but it had a weapon with which Paris intended to win the financial battle with the United States. The French ship had brought banknotes to the value of $750 million to the United States in order to exchange them for real money, that is, for gold. That was the first tranche payment to the Federal Reserve System. All the formalities are met. The representative of the Bank of France is ready to provide half of the said amount to the US Treasury. The money is here, read the official dispatch from Paris to Washington. Exchange under the rules of the gold pool could only be made to the US Treasury. The hull of the French money ship was waiting to unload the $750 million. At an exchange rate of 1.1 grams of gold per dollar, Paris's move away from the US currency turned out to be very productive. 825 tons of the yellow metal is a large amount. Another ship carrying the same amount was on the way, and that was only the beginning. By the end of 1965, there remained only about $800 million of the $5.5 billion French foreign reserves in the US. Of course, de Gaulle had not brought down the dollar alone. However, the French currency intervention had created a dangerous precedent for the US. Following the unpredictable move by France, zealous Germans pulled together to change dollars for gold bars. Their exchange was several times larger than the $1.5 billion of France. Americans were shocked by this bold play, but had to change the greenbacks for gold. Then the central banks of other countries, Canada and Japan, followed suit. The news about the US gold reserves at that time were like frontline reports on the battlefield. In March of 1968, the Americans limited the free exchange of dollars for gold for the first time. By the end of July 1971, the US authorities declared the gold reserve of America had dropped to its lowest level, less than $10 billion. This is when the Nixon shock happened. On the 15th of August 1971, the US President Richard Nixon made a television appearance and announced the dollar would no longer be secured by gold. Since that time, the world currencies have been subjected to the principle of a financial pyramid without any checks or balances. Incidentally, the US has yet to recover from the gold shock. After the monetary Austerlitz, de Gaulle's power did not last long. In 1968, massive student riots with the motto, 10 years, that's enough, flooded France. On April the 28th, 1969, de Gaulle left his office voluntarily before the end of his term. We must remember that bankers use wars and revolutions as tools of influence, so it's easy to guess who had a lot to gain. Hugo Chavez and Saddam Hussein. The Venezuelan leader, Hugo Chavez, was one of the first who attempted to break out of the vicious circle of petrodollars. Under his leadership, Venezuela, the largest oil producer in the Western Hemisphere and known to be unfavorable towards American oil corporations, refused to sell oil for dollars and preferred barter transactions. Venezuela stopped selling oil and instead bought goods for its black gold. Fact of the rise of Chavez to power was a revolution in itself. While in office, all his actions and reforms were a challenge to injustice, moneybags, and the predatory hegemony of US capitalism. He nationalized all the important areas of production: oil and gas production, metallurgy, and cement production. He threw private American companies out of the country. They were there to exploit the time-tested Latin scenario of total privatization. After such bold step, the political life of the country became quite hectic, with attempted assassinations against Hugo Chavez, failed rebellions, strikes, and demonstrations. America made it clear that such an intensive historical period was directly related to the fact that Venezuela was going against its vital national interests. It was not surprising when in 2011 the president of Venezuela was diagnosed with cancer. Chavez accused the United States of this incurable disease. After his death in 2013, the economic situation in Venezuela began to worsen and is now close to being a failed state. Then there is the story of Iraq. In November of 2000, Saddam Hussein demanded that all payments for Iraqi oil, supplied under the UN program Oil for Food, is to be made only in euro, which was of course strongly opposed by the US, which led Saddam to threaten to stop all supplies of Iraqi oil to the world market. Saddam Hussein, the ruler of Iraq, was a man who could not be judged simplistically. He was an extraordinary person, but no matter what others say about him, this person had really done a lot for his people. He ruled during the time of the Middle East unrest of the late 20th century, and many of his decisions may seem controversial or violent, but he managed to fight terrorism very effectively. He never afforded them rights or conducted negotiations with them. This was a war without rules. Saddam Hussein had implemented large-scale economic and social reforms. He also created one of the most advanced healthcare systems in the Middle East. He introduced free general secondary education at all stages, from kindergarten to university. At the beginning of 1998, 80% of the population could read and write. The era of Saddam Hussein was determined to be a period of stability and security for the people of Iraq. One of Iraqi school teachers said that during the time of Saddam, there was still a huge gap between the ruling class and the common people in living standards. But the country was living in security, and people were proud to be Iraqis. It should be noted that a few years after the execution of Saddam Hussein in 2009, a report of the US Senate Intelligence Committee appeared, according to which the Iraqi leader had no ties with the Al-Qaeda. It completely denied the statements of George W. Bush about the long-standing connection of Saddam's dictatorship with terrorist organizations and confirmed the fact that the United States, for their own selfish interests, used flimsy facts and outright lies for the invasion of other sovereign states. Saddam Hussein sentenced Lifti Saber, who acted as the Iraqi government's coordinator for cooperation with the international coalition forces, to death. Lifti Saber spent 8 years in isolation while Saddam was in power. He said, I wish Saddam would have remained in power. The whole system was changed so no one can do anything. If he made decisions, they were carried out. People knew what to do. Now, the country is in chaos, and no one does anything because nobody knows how to take responsibility. I never thought I would say it considering he has sentenced me to death, but I would like to see Saddam still ruling the state. Only he knew how to make this godforsaken country work. Do you know why the West had problems with Saddam Hussein? It was his decision to sell oil for euros instead of dollars. It was in the year of 2000, and anyone who betrayed the dollar would not live to tell the tale. Iran also announced its intentions to make all oil settlements in euro, and sanctions were imposed against it. This pattern had become familiar. Gaddafi the Tyrant and his Libya. In 2010, the US and NATO had drawn the conclusion that democratic changes are up in Libya. The people of Libya wanted a new political regime in the country, and Gaddafi the dictator was impeding the process. After all, his regime was oppressing the defenseless people. Only Gaddafi's death could change the situation. However, as we know now, the result was quite different, not fitting television truth. The death of Muammar Gaddafi was a long time coming. But do the people of Libya feel easier now? Thousands of victims, ruined cities, and disasters, a direct result of Obama's peacemaking. The Libyan leader spoke about caring for his people. He proposed reforms up until he died, and he never had a chance to implement them. Nobody paid much attention to that message against the backdrop of the bombing, the endless victims, and the cries of the democratic media. As it turned out later, Gaddafi's independent ideas predetermined his murder. His deadly sin of wanting a better life for his people went against the US objectives in the region. The wise leader realized that his country was being hopelessly and unscrupulously robbed. Gaddafi was going to change the situation for the benefit of the Libyan people, but his murder came before he could do that. In debating the murder of Gaddafi, we cannot ignore his ideas to develop his country. Libya is mostly desert, but rich with oil and natural resources. This made it a great market for the corporate greed. Agriculture in Libya could have taken a giant step forward. Gaddafi tried to irrigate and green up the desert of Libya through the creation of an irrigation system taking water from a huge natural underground reservoir. He encouraged foreign companies to implement that project. The corporations immediately estimated the potential losses that would result from this project, and they would have none of that. Corporations are not looking to advance economies in other countries. They prefer it as it is. They only need new markets. The West believes that Libya, as a resource-rich country, should be strictly controlled. Once the country's leader began to attack the corporate greed by wanting to keep a third of the oil revenues for his own people, it was looked at as resistance, and the media painted the picture that the people wanted to overthrow the bloody regime. To answer the question, why was Gaddafi killed, we should recall the most radical idea of Gaddafi. As we already know, the world is ruled by the dollar. It will rule as long as it remains the world's currency. Ever since the 70s of the last century, it was tied to oil in a fundamental way. Even failing to sell 200 barrels of oil for the dollar will cause it to start losing its position. Its rule becomes threatened. Muammar Gaddafi realized that. His idea was to create a pan-African currency, which, in contrast to the dollar, would be secured with gold. The idea was very promising in itself, but jeopardized the well-being of those who live for the lending rate. He dared to invade the Western world's financial system and the distribution of cash flow. A new currency would deflate the unsecured dollar. How long would the dollar's position stay if another currency, tied to the stable gold equivalent, started to be used? The answer to this question is key to understanding why Gaddafi was murdered. Libya is now destroyed. Cities have been ruined, women and children are being killed, and the people are suffering and starving. The economy has ceased to exist. Corporations extract oil, and Libya has no revenue. The country receives only humanitarian aid, for which it has to pay. The impoverishment of the people is the goal of the Western democratic change. The US President Obama never withheld the reason for Gaddafi's murder. The dollar must live on. 6 years later, he confessed that he considered the killing of the Libyan leader to be the biggest mistake of his presidency. However, the world cannot change course. The controlling elite would never allow that. This process has been defined for centuries. All the parts have been cast. Lone interest, in their minds, should rule the humanity until the end. Anyone who opposes this turns into a mortal enemy of the United States Democrats. The lesson has been learned. The leaders of other countries should think clearly whether they want to be patriots of the countries or will they continue this process of selling their countries. Obama declared clearly that the United States is the major superpower of the world. Resistance will not be tolerated. Revenge will be fierce. Death alone would not be enough. Dissident countries will be wiped off the face of the earth, and nations will be destroyed. The Western version of the political and economic system knows no mercy or compassion. The world must remain unipolar under all circumstances. No expense, effort, or human life will be spared. The dollar has been left alone for a while. No one wants the same fate as Muammar Gaddafi. However, bold moves are being made. China started to gradually abandon the dollar. Today, all settlements in yuan are conducted with Japan. But this is the first step. The highly populated country cannot create a bastion of democracy all at once. There is no proper background for a strong domestic political regime. Beijing doesn't welcome the revolutionaries in its territory, and the West is not given its approval. Refusal of using the dollar as a financial settlement was also declared by other countries. Britain has started trading with Japan in different national currencies. Other countries will follow in the near future. The dollar cannot continue to control the international community when its weak point is no longer a secret. Many people in Libya believe that Gaddafi was the only ruler who really thought about his people. Let's look at the achievements of Libya, headed by the so-called bloody dictator. Petrol was cheaper than water. 1 liter of petrol, 14 cents. Just married couples were given $64,000 by the government to buy an apartment. Education and medicine were completely free. For each family member, the state granted $1,000 each year. Unemployment benefit was $730. No NATO military bases. Nurse salary was $1,000. For each newborn, $7,000 was given. One-time financial support for startup companies, $20,000. Major taxes and levies were banned. GDP per person, $14,192. Education and training abroad at the expense of the state. Chain stores for large families had low prices for basic foodstuffs. Units of the special police applied heavy fines and detention for the sale of expired products. Some pharmacies dispensed medication for free. Death penalty for counterfeiting medicine. No residential rental payments. Free electricity for the population. Sale and consumption of alcohol was prohibited. The dry law was in effect. Car and apartment loans were interest-free. Realtor services were banned. The state paid 50% when a citizen bought a car, and for the people's militia fighters, 65% of the cost. When Gaddafi came to power, he expelled international corporations from the country. Over the 40 years of his rule, Libya's population has tripled. Infant mortality decreased by a factor of 9. Life expectancy in the country has increased from 51.5 to 74.5 years. Gaddafi decided to withdraw Libya from the global banking system, and another 12 Arab countries wanted to follow his example. John Perkins' book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, describes this case and many others. The book reveals all the dirt and aggression of the power players used for the sake of modern imperialism. How to restrain progress. The general population are told that as soon as a breakthrough technology is invented, it will get the proper business development and quickly reach the consumer. However, these inventions of so-called breakthrough technologies, or better known as innovative technologies that result in a reduction of the need for resources, including human resources, are monitored and stopped. This preserves the established order of things under the pretext of protection against unemployment and the collapse of the global industrial chain. We continue to work for a small elite burning expensive oil in technologically obsolete machines. Free energy. In 1899, a Serbian physicist, Nikola Tesla, found a way to create electricity and power without burning fossil fuels or using power plants and transmission lines. He proved that using ionization of the upper atmosphere to create electrical oscillations can be utilized as free energy. Using a special testing ground, Tesla created his power plants operating under the free energy principle. Today, this is called the energy vacuum. In 1898, banker John Pierpont Morgan, who was financially supporting Tesla's research, realized the success of his work and ordered the destruction of all the plants and the testing ground. He could see that these inventions would make fossil fuels obsolete. He realized that energy, which is free for everyone, would not bring him the profit he was used to by billing people for each watt consumed. Since that time, the world is still searching for the power. Tesla's experiment of turning on coal ignition bulbs from a distance without wires was repeated by the Russian scientist Filipov, who created an installation in St. Petersburg to turn on bulbs in Tsarskoye Selo. He was a unique all-round scholar. He had a doctorate in mathematics, physics, chemistry, and philosophy. In winter of 1914, he sent a solution for avoiding wars of humanity to the General Staff of Russia. In 7 days it was published in the tabloid press, and 3 days later he was found killed in his home office. The gendarmes were unable to determine the methods used for his murder. Tesla had many followers because the idea of providing humanity with free energy stayed with scientists and enthusiasts. In 1921, the press reported Alfred Hubbard's invention, a generator which moved boats without external energy supplied to it. In 1927, Thomas Brown from England took out a patent on methods for generation of driving forces and power out of electric fields. In 1928, Lester Hendershot invented the electric generator, releasing 300 watts without any external energy supplied to it. In 1968, Raymond Cromrie built a generator described in the US patent number 3374376, Cromrie Electric Generator. However, after numerous tests, the research was placed on a secret list. John Searley's magnetic generator. For over 60 years, John Searley was trying to give the world a new type of energy system which would free humanity from the burden of dependence on fossil fuel resources. This generator is a magnetic device with its own engine, activating its own magnetic power and operating without stopping. Searley's uses the magnetic fields causing magnetic rollers to rotate continuously around the magnetic rings and generating electricity. No noise, heat, vibration, or pollution. This is Searley generator. It can get off the ground and create its own gravitational field. When you see such things, you realize they are perfect mechanisms, the most important inventions ever created by humans. How to restrain progress. He was only trying to create a generator that could power your house. He concluded that large generators at power plants were a waste of money and meant great pollution problems for humanity in the future. His idea was to create a simple electrical generator that could be easily manufactured. Of course, many obstacles met Searley, and his invention never made it to the public use. Tesla's free energy generator. In 2010, the inventor from Turkey, Muammer Yildiz, introduced his work to the world's scientists. It was based on the principles of Tesla's free energy. No power supply was used, and it worked perfectly throughout the demonstration and was even dismantled for everyone to see. During the demonstration, no wires were connected to the engine from an external electric power source. 30 scientists were watching the engine operate in an isolated room. After the experts certified that it had been functioning for 10 minutes at a constant speed of rotation, the engine was dismantled and everybody could see that it contained no other supply of power. Unfortunately, this technology has not been developed further following the fate of most revolutionary discoveries. CIA and free energy. John Chaker was a secret agent for the CIA and an expert on alternative energy sources. He was a curator of the inventor John Bedini, to whom he gave a copy of the archive inventions which he collected during the many years of service in the CIA. The archive contains over 150 documents containing full description of devices, experiments, and technologies, each of which could make a revolution in the modern world. The full list of John Chaker archive materials is available in the book. There were also a number of successful experiments and inventions without fuel or self-fed power plants registered in the USSR. However, they never became more than prototype models. The full list of USSR database of patents containing generators or motors and the alleged perpetual motion machines is available in the book. Kanarev's autorotative generator. In 2011, a 2-month trial of the world's first autorotative generator of electrical impulses, MG1, by the Russian inventor Philip M. Kanarev, showed that such generators are meant for the future. The generator has opened the way for domestic power units which can be supplied with battery power. This generator will automatically recharge the battery. The battery energy will also be enough to power automobiles. Nuclear fusion. Billions of dollars have been spent on researching energy production through controlled hot fusion experiments, which are a series of risky and unpredictable experiments. Meanwhile, the garage scientists and the marginal group of university researchers are coming closer to putting cold fusion power to service. This source is much more stable and controllable, but also much less supported by government funding. In 1989, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons announced a discovery after witnessing cold fusion in a glass jar on their lab bench. Saying that they received a cold reaction from the media was an understatement. CBS 60 Minutes revealed the fierce retaliation by researchers of the well-funded hot fusion community. This sent the cold fusion research underground, where the funding sources dried up and forced them to abandon their clean energy research. Russian scientists Parkhomov and Bezhutov have created cold fusion working plants independently of each other. However, unknown forces prevented the publication of their results. These and dozens of others, not very well-known designs, were simply ignored by the power players in order to preserve their monopoly over the legacy systems. Cold fusion is not the only process that was buried. After the two physicists who worked on the 10-year hot fusion project in tokamak, toroidal chamber with magnetic coils, found a cheap and safe method of energy generation from atomic collision. They were forced to renounce their own discoveries under threat of dismissal. The laboratory was afraid to lose funding of the work on tokamak. In response, the leading researchers created a society of focal synthesis, gathering private money to finance their own research outside the scope of state intervention. Machinery under a ban. The end of the American tramway. Net profit from the prosperous tram transport in the US was $1 billion in 1921. For the largest American automotive corporation, General Motors, it meant a loss of $65 million. That is why GM bought and closed hundreds of independent tram companies, which contributed to the growth of its own market share for its fuel-consuming buses and cars. That scandal was called the Tramway Conspiracy. GM Company were fined only $5,000, and each of its top leaders only $1 for the purchase of General Motors Company buses by transport enterprises. Although in recent years, the movement to save the public transport in the major US cities is growing, it is unlikely that we will see the return of trams to their former glory. Water-operated means of transport. Invention or Hoax, an article by L. Wasilewski was published in Techniques of Youth magazine number 2 of the year 1962, says that in 1917, a US immigrant from Portugal, Juan Andrés, invented a fuel for internal combustion engines, the main component of which was water. It needed only a few drops of simple and inexpensive chemicals added to it. A special state commission tested that fuel in a car at a motor rally from New York to Washington and back. After that, one of the largest US oil monopolies bought the documentation and the rights to the invention from Andrés for $2 million in cash and has since hidden it in its vaults. Andrés disappeared 2 days after receiving the money. The authenticity of this water-based fuel has been confirmed by a number of publications. In the Esquire newspaper, in an article titled Proceedings of the US Naval Institute in 1926 and 1936. The data of L. Wasilewski's article can be fully trusted, because the former head of the Department of Scientific and Technical Intelligence in the KGB, who led this department from the 1930s, has endorsed it. No matter how ridiculous it might sound, there are water-operated vehicles. The most famous of them was a sand buggy of Stan Meyer that made a 100 miles per gallon journey and could have been more widespread if the 57-year-old Meyer did not have a suspicious brain aneurysm. Well-informed people were making statements that Meyer had been poisoned after he refused to sell his patent and stop the research. To avoid further damage, his partners decided to hide the famous water-operated sand buggy. A resident of Brazil, Ricardo Azevedo, designed a water-operated motorcycle using a chemistry school textbook. A current was supplied to the motorcycle water tank. It separated the liquid into hydrogen and oxygen via the process of electrolysis. The result was gaseous hydrogen. The resulting hydrogen gas was used for engine power. However, this will unlikely be mass-produced in our world. A radical reduction of fuel consumption. A car that burns a gallon of fuel for every 99 miles, or about 2.4 liters per 100 kilometers, would be the holy grail for the automotive public. This technology has been available for several years, but automakers have deliberately kept it away from the US market. In the year of 2000, New York Times reported the little-known fact that Volkswagen's diesel-fueled Lupo made a trip around the world with an average fuel consumption of over 99 miles per gallon. Lupo was being sold in Europe from 1998 to 2005. However, the sales were quietly reduced under various pretexts. The US never brought it to market, claiming that the Americans supposedly had no interest in small economical cars. Back in the 1930s, Shell Oil Company announced a competition for the creation of a car with minimal fuel consumption. And so the Studebaker was created before World War II. Its fuel consumption was 5.5 liters per 100 kilometers. However, the world record belongs to the Japanese, who in 1986 created a car that consumes 0.055 liters of petrol, about 44 grams per 100 kilometers. Today there are no factories producing such engines. The destruction of the electric car. Perhaps the most notorious example of a great invention that was swept under the carpet was the EV1 of General Motors. The documentary film Who Killed the Electric Car was shot to tell its story. EV1 was the world's first mass-produced electric car, and GM gave 800 cars for rental companies in the late 1990s. However, the company closed the EV line in 1999, citing consumer dissatisfaction with the limited cruising range as the main factor, and that the continued production was unprofitable for the company. The interesting question to General Motors is, why did they then track and destroy all EV1s in the market, which ensured the disappearance of the technology used in making them? Many experts believe that GM buried the EV1 under pressure from the oil companies, who would have suffered the most if high-efficiency cars running on electric power took the market. A Japanese motorcycle with a magnetic engine. The super novelty motorcycle, the Honda Sumo, is 7 times more efficient than a petrol-operated equivalent. It is silent, with a maximum speed of 150 km per hour. Many people would like to buy this vehicle, but for some reason, its production is prohibited. Who has done this and why? In 2013, the Japanese news wires were filled with sensational news about the creation of the most environmentally friendly vehicle, a unique Japanese motorcycle with a magnetic engine that required no petrol. It turned out that the motorcycle used a magnetic field as both fuel and engine. The principle of the magnetic engine was described nearly 20 years earlier by the Russian inventor F.I. Svinitsky. Moreover, the patent was granted in Russia in 1997. However, the invention still had no support from state or private producers in the automobile industry. A Japanese motorcycle with a magnetic engine was a worthy competitor to the modern electric vehicle. For all the benefits of the electric car's environmental friendliness, it still used electricity which was generated by processing natural resources. But this unique invention by the Japanese had the lightest environmental footprint. It is unknown whether it will ever be produced. The press said that this type of engine threatened the automaker's business so much that it is impossible to imagine it produced in the future. Magnetic engine vehicles are a revolution in the automotive world. The Japanese have realized that such technologies will not require or depend on oil or gas in the future. Japan could become virtually self-sufficient. Toyota started a program to implement this technology in their cars. Tanigaki, the Minister of Finance, began to pursue a more independent policy towards automotive innovation. However, the world bankers started to blackmail Japan. Benjamin Fulford, a journalist living in Japan, interviewed the Minister of Finance, Tanigaki. The minister repeated what he had said before, that he had received a threat from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, that if Japan did not obey the policy of the International Monetary Fund and the Federal Reserve, force would be used against Japan. Japan did not fulfill the requirements of the international bankers, and force was used against it. It resulted in the destruction of the main Toyota plants and the terrible catastrophe at Fukushima's nuclear power plant. This is the real story behind the tragedy in Japan. The Phoebe Cartel. In 1924 to 1939, Philips, General Electric, and Osram worked together for establishing control of the new production of electric bulbs, as Time magazine revealed years later. The cartel allegedly set prices and crushed the competitive technologies that were more efficient and had a longer lifespan. By the time the alliance ended its hegemony and control over artificial light in Europe and North America, the standard for incandescent lamps was already established. Compact fluorescent lamps came to the world market only as far back as late 90s. Food, the hidden genocide. How the common people of the US could not grow fruits and vegetables in the US. The Senate passed the Agricultural Bill S-510 in June of 2010, prohibiting the growing, sharing, exchanging, or selling products grown on private garden plots belonging to ordinary citizens, and would be considered a felony. It also dictated to American farmers the type and amount of crops that were permissible by law, as well as the methods to be used in farming. That bill was called Fake Food Safety Bill. Now an owner of a private garden can have problems with the law for planting common vegetables, as these should be left to the province of large farms and corporations. The United States created a special department for the control of gardens. The police had the right to check what American farmers and small growers grew in their own backyards. The government was keen to monitor all Americans. The problem is not only that corporations want the world's population to consume their products, but it's the fact that they don't want to see people free and independent to choose. They want complete control of our lives. Any attempt by the people of the United States to return to the origins of agriculture is severely repressed by the state. The mass media brainwash people. Letting someone program your mind with a flow of information daily changes your view of life dramatically. On the internet, for example, US news flow from 60 major news sites belonging to the 10 largest publishers. This information is more than half the total internet news traffic. The largest online news publishers for American audiences are MSN and Disney Media Networks. In TV and radio, there are only 6 global players. In the US, an average person consumes about 10 hours of information daily between news and entertainment programs. The 6 giant media corporations that dominate the media market produce and report most of this. Analysts have estimated that they produce about 90% of the information flow that fills our minds. These organizations are owned and controlled by the world's elite. Here are some figures that reflect the amount of news and entertainment programs that an average American consumes daily. Live shows, 4 hours, 32 minutes. TV shows, 30 minutes. Radio, 2 hours and 44 minutes. Smartphone, 1 hour and 33 minutes. Online, 1 hour and 6 minutes. Put all these numbers together and you get a total of more than 10 hours per day. This does not include the time spent on going to the cinema or playing video games. Many people take the TV as a window into politics or a means of entertainment, but this is putting it too simply and creates an epidemic of disinformation as it hides the important information on what truly impacts society and forms proper models of behavior, norms, and values. We can see this process in action through the example of children who still have an uninformed ideological picture of life and are more susceptible to deception. Incidentally, that is why children and young people are the main targets of television brainwashing and aggressive advertising. The factors to be considered are the individual's age, their environment, and, among other things, the type and frequency of information viewed. Working with a mass audience, however, as the national channels do, requires 2 areas of focus: the critical thinking skills of the audience or the critical filter. The second is a positive or negative emotional background that accompanies the demonstrated model of behavior. If a person is watching TV as entertainment or as a way to rest, but does not think about the purpose of why he is watching or the reason behind the creation of the content, then his critical filter is not operating while he watches and consumes the information. It is in this way that most people become addicted to watching. If they understood the real purpose behind it, they would not allow their children to watch, and they would watch much less than they do. When a continuous stream of negative media is shown on your screen, and one positive piece of news comes within this stream, your behavior will likely lead to inappropriate actions, and sometimes tragic consequences. Psychos, perverts, and immoral characters are becoming heroes of TV stories in today's entertainment world. They are invited to shows, and movies are made about them. If a hero shows a harmful pattern of behavior, like drinking alcohol, it is stored within our psyche as a negative emotional background. This is not always a good thing, as some negative behaviors should not be advertised to a large audience. If harmful behavior models are connected to an otherwise positive character, and we watch this without any critical thinking, then it is automatically stored in the viewer's memory as something positive. In the future, after watching multiple times, it will become imprinted and affect the viewer's behavior. That is what TV is doing today. TV can show a sober festival and society will gradually move towards sobriety. Instead, we show festivals that are supported by alcohol companies, which turn its festivals into drinking fests, leading more people towards inappropriate and even dangerous paths. Both situations are a reflection of reality but have different impacts on society. The state does not care about the mental health of the population when television and film do not promote the right values. Mental health suffers from the TV's virtual drugs. Do the content producers know about this impact? Of course they do. These are all principles of psychology and unstructured management created to exploit the situation and make what the consumer wants. This is conscious and systematic work on the debilitation and corruption of the population, reasonably called the destructive propaganda. At the same time, the differences between stations, channels and movies are aesthetic rather than substantive in nature. Television is a tool to keep you entertained in your living room by people you would never let through your door. TV corporations are built under the cover of the rating system and the myth that people like watching vulgarity and stupidity. Most TV employees who have worked in this realm of lies and manipulation for a couple of years understand the real objectives of their work and the impact that television has on society. But the high salaries, which far exceed the average, help put the truth aside. To summarize, the distribution of information is a process of control, as it affects the viewers in many ways. Ratings and myths that people like watching vulgarity or TV reflects reality are a false cover for what is really models of antisocial behavior on TV. An effective response to the mental debilitation of the public by TV should be based on the formation of the critical thinking skills in people. Today, television operates in a more subtle and refined way due to discoveries in psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and many other disciplines. For assessing television content and the viability of watching certain programs, people can use the basic principles above about television and its effect on the viewer. The enslavement of people can last a long time. However, they will eventually break free from the chains that have kept them down for so long and come to the truth. We all need to learn to think for ourselves. If you are still dependent on the flow of information that is programming you and supplying you with the information from giant corporations, then you should reconsider this and come out of that matrix. You will be overjoyed to rid yourself of this dependence. Resource-based economy. Today, overpopulation, energy and water shortages, pollution, disease, economic disaster, conflicts and ecological catastrophe are reaching dangerous levels. Our species is under existential threat. People experience the same threats wherever they are. Our current system does not provide equal opportunity for everyone. It does not care about our habitat and seems intent on its destruction. Its main driving force is profit. This profit incentive has been ravaging our world for the profit of international bankers. The economy of industrially developed countries exists on credit, disregarding the enormous burden on the resource capacity of our planet. It protects the interests of transnational corporations and not the interests of people. One of its pillars is the mass consumption of the consumer credit system, which received the green light from US President Ronald Reagan. In 2008, the financial and economic crisis was a result of this system. The monetary system has become a destructive model for our socio-economic needs. Money is no longer a means to an end, it has become an end in itself. It motivates us for the wrong reasons and blinds us to the folly of what we do. It paralyzes the will and does not motivate us towards social and cultural reform. After World War II, the US government was greatly concerned about the development of the national economy, because the military industry no longer required the same amount of labor and the soldiers needed employment as they came back from the front. In 1953, Arthur Burns, the head of the Council on Economy for President Eisenhower, said, "The ultimate goal of the US economy is to produce more consumer goods. In 1955, the economist and analyst Victor Lebeau proposed a model for increasing consumption in the Journal for Retailing. He stated, "Our productive economy demands that we make consumption a way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek spiritual satisfaction for our ego in consumption. We need to consume things, burn them, replace and abandon them at an ever-increasing rate." The concept gained popularity for two reasons: planned obsolescence and forced obsolescence. In magazines on industrial design of the 1950s, the planned obsolescence scheme was discussed in detail, and openly discussed at that. Planned obsolescence has a technical and technological nature, and forced obsolescence was dominated by fashion and popular culture. We are now faced with the results of our contradiction, the increasing needs on the planet and our inability to provide for those needs without destroying the planet. In the 1970s, our consumption began to exceed the planet's ability to regenerate its resources. Environmentalists believe that it now requires the Earth 1.5 years of reproduction to cover what humankind uses in 1 year. This, along with the population growth and the diminishing food and water supply, puts our life and our planet directly in front of a global disaster and a socio-economic disaster. The socio-economic situation is as if you were in an airplane midway across the Atlantic Ocean and you ran out of fuel. As it stands today, only the financial elite have the parachutes. We are proposing a parachute, and that is to change the world together. CWT is a socio-economic model where the rights of any person are not just words on paper, but an exercise in reality. We present a vision of the future from a perspective that utilizes all relevant knowledge and uses technology in a way that creates a sustainable global civilization. We believe that a new development pathway for humanity should be implemented. We call for a goal-oriented approach to reconstruct the social fabric of societies in which the timeless problems of wars, poverty, famine, debt, environmental damage and suffering, apart from being soluble, should be considered totally inadmissible. Resource-based economies is a whole-factor socio-economic system in which all goods and services are available without the use of money, credit, barter, or any other system of debt or servitude. All resources become the common heritage of all of the inhabitants, not just a select few. Redirecting technological development and managerial philosophy will greatly improve efficiency in our economy. The term resource-based economy is widespread due to its popularization by Jacques Fresco in the framework of the Venus Project. In his books, Jacques Fresco says, "With our technology, we could eliminate most of our social problems. Is modern technology incapable of producing the required amount of food, clothing, shelter, and other material benefits for everyone if we use them wisely? What prevents us from achieving this? Technology rushes forward, but our society is still firmly holding on to the concepts and techniques invented many centuries ago." What he said is obviously true. We have advanced technology and use it as a means of destruction, rather than making it possible to provide free access to food, clothing, housing, education and healthcare to all inhabitants of the planet. We can solve our energy crisis and make a fundamental shift towards conservation and alternative energy. We can also redirect its use to create favorable conditions for a prosperous and effective new social model that uses a different means of exchange. One that widens its reach and touches everyone rather than a few. We can only achieve this if we remove the noose of the current monetary system from around the modern society's neck. The blind consumption of today will lead humanity to a dead end. This became clear in the 1970s on the back end of the energy and economic crisis. In the 1980s, we began talking openly about a new world model whose main objectives were as follows: the rejection of any kind of pseudo-needs, starting with weapons, harmful drugs, including alcohol and nicotine, luxury items, and the over-replication of similar products. A fundamental rejection of the production of unsustainable products that hurt the environment. A new policy for de-urbanization of congested cities. The construction of new housing systems to balance the inequality between have and have-nots. to distribute gardening and farming facilities to more people so we can have a healthier contribution to the food supply and transition to a higher quality of life, to eliminate the use of harmful chemicals in agriculture and nurture the natural ecosystem to better protect plants and animals, to remove harmful chemicals from our cleaning technology, optimizing our energy consumption and expenditure by increasing the proportion of clean energy sources, namely solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal, along with new sources. Optimizing the world mass balance by increasing the percentage of recycled materials against the total consumption and production of sustainable products. Greater involvement of people in solving social problems across the globe. The reformation of social consciousness in 7 key areas: world affairs, science, art, morality, law, psychology, and religion. Refocus efforts to develop a culture of health, natural living, and a balanced development of the human personality. More time for parents to be directly involved in the education of children through a leisure structure rather than formal and substandard education, to make family and community more desired and serve to better educate the youth. This thesis was developed in the book by the English economist Ernst Schumacher, titled "Small is Beautiful: A Study of Economics as if People Mattered." The same thesis can be found also in the books by J. Forrester, titled "World Dynamics," Donella Meadows' "The Limits to Growth." Among other notable examples are Michael Masaryk and Edward Pestel's "Mankind at the Turning Point" and John Tinbergen's "Revision of the International Order." The authors urge to combine the inheritance received by man, technique, with irreplaceable dowry, natural resources. That is the combination of economy and ecology. They also prove that wealth, which is standard of living, is one of the conditions of welfare, that is, quality of life, but these things are not equal. While the profit incentive is still the priority, the same problems will repeat again and again. What tasks has the CWT movement set itself to? Here is a highlight of the main directions. The transition from a monetary-based economy to a resource-based economy, optimization and improvement of the global financial system, elimination of all kinds of hatred and their extreme manifestations, removing the social inequity between people, improving the level of education and awareness about the current world crisis, encouraging creative thinking and igniting the creative principle in humankind, a sharing economy that promotes the interchange and promotion of new technologies for the benefit of all peoples, the development and use of clean and renewable energy sources, promotion of economic projects that contribute to the restoration of the environment and the rational use of resources. The economy, and specifically the monetary system, should be reformed as quickly as possible, but also steadily and progressively. An example of this would be the elimination of the banking system of fractional reserve and interest rates. The purpose of the new social model is to activate new incentives, to transition to a resource-based economy by eliminating the conditions that give rise to greed, envy, and the hyper-competitive environment that we live in. New incentives are designed to encourage people toward fulfillment of the self and the other through creativity and the motivation for collective well-being. The measure of success will be the realization of these aspirations through their results, leading to longer and healthier lives that are more rich and fulfilling. If we do care about the future of humanity and our environment, we must change the social and economic processes which are responsible for the majority of our problems. Given a fair and reasonable application of science and technology, the people of Earth will be able to determine the course of future development and protect the environment. Our problems today are global and massive in their scale and impact. They cannot be solved single-handedly. To implement these plans, it is vital to combine efforts in promoting the interests of ordinary people. Only consolidated efforts will enable us to correct the mistakes of the past and provide a healthy and productive environment for our children and future generations. If we unite, we can do a lot together. We can change the world. The world as a cinema. For better understanding of the distribution of resources in the world, I suggest considering the model of our society in the form of a cinema. Imagine a large cinema for 7 billion seats, according to the number of the population. One seat, it's a part of our planet's resources for normal existence of one person. We already consider our world rich and self-sufficient. We have the technology and resources to meet the needs of all people living on the earth. We just need to put the priority not on the profit and wealth, but on just satisfaction of these needs. Making the rational use of resources, its optimization and implementation of intelligent technologies will make it possible to build a completely different world. So we imagine that our world is a cinema, in which each person takes his seat where he is guaranteed to get conditional benefits package. This guaranteed social package includes the ability to implement their creative talents, live in decent conditions in a house or apartment, free education and medical services, healthy food, clean water and comfortable rest. And what comes out in reality? There is a saying that everyone is equal, but some are more equal than others. And these more equal than others believe that they have a right to hold not one, but several seats in the cinema. We are imposed the values in the form of money, and while chasing after them, each is trying to get as much seats as possible. For instance, if you're a member of parliament, it means that you have the right for 10 seats. If an oligarch, 1,000 seats. It turns out that one person gets 1,000 times more resources than he can neither absorb nor digest, and the other, instead of chairs, huddles on the steps in the aisle. One lives in a luxurious palace, fattens and overeats, while the others, whom he had kicked off their chairs, are forced to vegetate in slums. Unfortunately, imposed on us is the false system of values that most people don't even recognize with any surprise or resistance. People are used to living like that. They are resigned to inequality. However, with the correct and rational use of resources, we can achieve results when everyone on Earth will live in conditions above the current average. Each will take his convenient and comfortable seat. But for this, you need to make an effort not to be indifferent and apathetic. By joining the ranks of the Change the World together, everyone will take the first step to reforming the global system of values. The financial system of the 21st century. We have already outlined the main issues humanity is facing, as well as the future that we can achieve if we unite our forces. What we have to understand, however, is that it is not coming overnight, no matter how much we want it to. It takes time and collective effort to prepare the new era. We cannot openly declare war against the established system. It is unproductive at best and harmful to the movement at worst. Besides, as long as the money bags control the law, it would be foolish to believe in justice. The courts they control will rule against us. After all, our actions are aimed at undermining their resource and power monopoly. But we can't sit back and watch as our freedom is taken away, or until their system falls apart on its own. So what can we do? We need to take alternative steps that help us move closer to our goals, yet comply with the law. What holds the current system in place and gives it its power? The petrodollar and oil. Oil is a natural resource, but it's the filthy dollar that is man-made. The dollar is what we need to focus on above everything else. The banks and their money. Banks are trying to convince us that they have our best interest in mind through advertisements and slogans every day. We are here for you 24/7, they say. Your money is safe with our bank. Enjoy life, we'll take care of the rest, they say. But we all know the truth. These banks couldn't care less about the welfare and convenience of their customers. They exist to profit their owners. This is the only goal of every bank in the world, and the surefire path to this end is to make their customers dependent on their services. Don't be fooled by the bank's intentions. It is not created for you. It needs you for the success of its owners. Clients exist for the banks, not the other way around. It is clients who make the existence of a bank possible. It does this by imposing commission charges and interest on credit card loans. annual payments, delivery payments, and payments on top of payments. It is constantly innovating to find new ways to make money from the client, whatever its advertisements may say. The world banking system has become so powerful, it created lobby to influence the political system. Almost all developed countries are subject to the banking lobby. It is not surprising to see it dictate cabinet picks, political party lines, and even influence presidential elections. Why? Banks own a lot of money. A lot of money means a lot of power, real power. The banking lobby is closely connected with the media, and oftentimes bankers are part owners of the largest media conglomerates. This control of the media allows them to manufacture consent and control public opinion. This kind of power becomes especially useful during election time. State power and the banks go together. Since banks have the money and the power, it is only natural they would want to be the only creators of money and the only official issuers of currency. On paper, it is the government who is responsible for the creation of money. However, as you may have realized by now, the state is not something made by the people and for the people, but a well-oiled machine designed to serve those really in power. That is why money is really made on the level of commercial banks. The money supply is subject to the will of its issuer. Money is a product of mutual trust. Its purchasing power is only valid as long as the public contract that people agree upon exists. Money has been evolving throughout the ages. Money from a few hundred years ago is merely a collector's item. You cannot go into a shop in Germany today and expect to buy products with the Deutsche Marks from the days of Hitler. Money is not a heavenly creation or something we find in our DNA. Money is a social convention. The banks have decreed that money is to be created from the top of the ladder and handed down to the state, appointed by the banking lobby to use. Any other way is considered to be treasonous to the very foundation of our society. So anyone who attempts to develop an alternative is either locked up or shot on the spot. Criticizing this system also increases the risk of sudden, unexpected heart attacks and even suicide. Leave the creation of money to the banks, period. Money issued by the banks continuously decrease in value, and it's very noticeable. Inflation, as any economist worth their salt will tell you, is vital for a healthy economy. Economists chant this passage as if they were in a cult. The opposite is true, however. Inflation is an artificial, unhealthy, and vile phenomenon, and the issuer of money is the only one who benefits from it. The issuer gives you money, but it turns out there's never enough, so you need more. Even if your salary is rising, the rate of inflation is usually 2 steps ahead. Inflation combined with usurious interest rates allows the bankers to sit back and enjoy the revenue with a smile on their faces. Issuing more money is a matter of pressing a few buttons. For you, it's earned through everyday labor. Money in itself doesn't represent goods and services. Excessive demand for different commodities and services creates bubbles. Futures, options, shares, oil, gold, anything to dump the money surplus into. So much money has been released into the system that we could buy everything on our planet several times over, including the population. To avert the attention of the general public from this knowledge, they cook up and present them with a crisis after crisis, all of them manufactured just to keep the illusion. The paper bills from under the printing press of the Fed, we are told, are valuable. We are told to buy goods, pay for services, and transact with each other using these paper bills. All the cooperation in the world is facilitated through this system. These pieces of paper will only have power for as long as we continue accepting their value and using them as money in our daily life. Unbridled emission of these colorful pieces of paper will cause the system to collapse if we stop using the dollar as a means of payment. If we stop using their money in our daily lives, the lifeblood of these banks will dry out. Once that happens, the Fed money will drop in value by 1,000 times. Since they're not backed by anything, their worth will be reduced to the paper and ink that is printed on it. Blockchain challenges fiat currencies. If you think about it, there isn't any real reason why anyone cannot come up with their own form of money and enter it into use with agreement of others. Many companies and websites use loyalty systems with points and bonuses that users can exchange for goods and services. Of course, these currencies only work within the system they were created in, and their worth outside of it is near zero. If you manage to take your currency to a greater level of prominence, and people begin using it as currency, you will be prosecuted and locked away in prison for a long time. The charges? It's rarely for financial crimes or anything of that sort. Sexual assault of a minor works best in these cases. This happened to the founder of the electronic payment service provider Liberty Reserve. He created a currency and didn't pay intermediaries for the permission to emit this money, as he found hundreds of thousands of willing participants. In May of 2013, his emission center was destroyed by US authorities, even though the currency posed no threat to US interests. This example serves as the lesson to everybody, keeping many from creating their own currencies. That is why the idea of private money came alive again in the digital age. The Internet is a network in the most proper sense of the word. The Internet connects hundreds of millions of computers and people at the same time. The speed of data transfer between the continents via fiber optic cables is near instantaneous. The Internet is the perfect platform for creating money, and that's indeed what people are doing. This is the first time when money has become ownerless. There are no more central emission centers that could be destroyed. There are no owners, directors, or vulnerable data centers. There is simply no target to attack. E-money challenged the traditional centralized emission systems, i.e. classic banks. A peer-to-peer network, decentralized, and subject only to the laws of true supply and demand, not some authorities, is available to all, on equal footing. Herman Gref, the CEO and chairman of the executive board of Sberbank of Russia, has noted that virtual global currencies such as Bitcoin require global regulation. He says, quote, "It's impossible to stop the world once it has started in this direction." End quote. His viewpoint is shared by other bankers. They don't like this direction. They don't want to see a network like Bitcoin succeed, and for there not to be a central regulation emission center for virtual currency. Bitcoin cannot be destroyed technically, so bankers try and deface it through the media and undermine its credibility. We have two choices at this point: to remain the indifferent observers or become active participants in the blockchain revolution. Cryptocurrency and the future financial system of a new society. Today, we already have a safe and fair alternative to the current monetary system. It is cryptocurrency. It's impossible to counterfeit, and it's immune to inflation as only a limited amount of coins is issued. It can provide complete anonymity of transactions. The role of e-currency in the near future cannot be overemphasized. Cryptocurrency is a new financial phenomenon. Many experts and economists openly admit that virtual currency may become the basis of a new financial system and the main means of payment in the future. According to the co-founder of cryptocurrency, Mark Hearn, this new financial model is a stateless system built by the people for the people, free of central regulation and without any financial mediators. There are no banks or bankers in this system. People control the exchange of money themselves. Among cryptocurrency pioneers were those who felt at home on the internet. These people and companies buy and sell goods and services online. The number of cryptocurrency users over the years has been increasing at an unprecedented rate, with no end in sight. You can already use cryptocurrency today to pay for a beer in a Berlin bar, order a pizza online in Amsterdam, or pay for a hotel in Moscow. You can pay for a taxi or book an airline ticket in Edinburgh, or pay for a visit to the dentist in Tokyo, or cover university tuition in Paris. You can even pay for a trip to space with Virgin Galactic. Anything can be paid for using this digital cash, even a drink at a street lemonade stand. Anyone with a smartphone can accept payment in cryptocurrency without a financial intermediary. However, the world has split into two camps. One camp believes that it is the future of money, and the other is adamant about the criminal nature of the technology, claiming it's only good for money laundering and financing terrorist groups. Nations with strong currencies don't have much problem with cryptocurrencies, while developing nations plagued by financial instability are trying to shield themselves from it. Today, there are over 2,000 virtual currencies such as Ethereum, Ripple, Litecoin, Lisk, and Dash, among other ones. Bitcoin still remains the most popular one. Its history starts in 2009. At first, Bitcoin was only known by a small circle within the tech community, and it was unclear whether or not it would reach wider adoption. Its value was very low at that point. Bitcoin's big break came when it became featured on an exchange capable of being turned in for real money. It was an ideal means for anonymous transactions, and it found popularity on underground and black marketplaces. This spiked the public interest in cryptocurrency, and the value of Bitcoin skyrocketed. Traders helped too, and now Bitcoin is world famous. It is Bitcoin that is the most popular and well-known cryptocurrency today, with a market capitalization of around $100 billion. It can be exchanged in ATMs for national currencies in a number of countries. Outlets and websites accept Bitcoin as payment for goods and services. How did all that came to be? The first and most important advantage is that the amount of currency issued in the system is decided from the outset. It is not a printable currency, and it cannot be created out of thin air. The process of creation is transparent and in full view of all the participants. The second advantage is that the system works without intermediaries. The traditional financial system is built to rely on middlemen. Banks and government authorities are there to confirm transactions. This takes time and money in the form of commission fees. Cryptocurrencies allow ditching all these intermediaries and make quick transactions in a matter of seconds. Peer-to-peer loans in the US have been around for over 10 years now, and this market is worth more than $80 billion. Consumer loans used to be given out exclusively by commercial banks, but with the advent of cryptocurrencies, we can connect borrowers and lenders directly, bypassing middlemen and cash entirely. Herman Gref, the head of one of Russia's biggest banks, said, quote, "This is a revolution in the world of financing, and if traditional banks fail to prepare for this revolution, then the revolution will take over these traditional banks." End quote. We can take this further. Imagine the possibilities if peer-to-peer lending unites ordinary lenders into credit unions in order to finance different economic projects of their choosing. This opens the door for profit sharing more equitably and can be complemented with fundraising. Blockchain technology can make this a reality. Blockchain, humanity, and the bankers. 3 is a crowd. There is no question that the future belongs to cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. It is easier, safer, borderless, and does not belong to the global bankers. It doesn't belong to them yet. However, the R3 consortium, which is composed of 42 banks from around the world, including Barclays, Bank of America, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Santander, and others, has already begun working on introducing blockchain technology, that is, distributed ledger without encryption, to the banking system. Banks are afraid of blockchain. A new report from PricewaterhouseCoopers says the globalists see as much as 33% of business taken away from the legacy banking system in the near future. The report says, quote, "In our view, blockchain may result in a radically different competitive future in the financial services industry, where current profit pools are disrupted and redistributed towards the owners of new, highly efficient blockchain platforms." End quote. And now, a parable about 3 sons and a bundle of sticks. Once upon a time, an old man had 3 sons. The 3 sons quarreled all the time. The old man wanted his sons to live in harmony with each other after his death. Months passed by, and the old man fell sick, so he decided to teach them a practical lesson. The old man called his sons and told them to break a bundle of sticks. The oldest son tried his best, but couldn't do it. The rest of his sons did the same and failed. The old man then gave a bundle of 10 sticks to each of them and asked them to break each stick into pieces. They broke the sticks into pieces in minutes. And again, they started to quarrel among themselves as to who was first. The old man said, "Dear sons, see, you could easily break the single sticks into pieces, but you were not able to break the bundle. So, if you stay united, nobody can do any harm to you. If you quarrel every time with your brothers, anyone can easily defeat you." The moral of this parable is that small groups can defeat large groups of enemies if they are united. As long as these enemies are quarreling, unity wins. There are over 40 million Bitcoin users today. Together with users of other cryptocurrencies, this number will easily exceed 100 million. In the near future, this number will exponentially increase as more people begin to join the movement against the current financial system and begin to transform the economy into a resource-based economy. We need to unite. That's what the financial elite and the bankers fear the most. We need to stop competing and arguing over personal gain. They have already united 42 banks against this movement, so there is little time to waste. Thus, the blockchain technology becomes just another tool that serves the few rather than the society at large. After understanding the injustice of the current financial, economic, and global management systems, we invite everybody who wishes to change the world to unite in a single international movement. Today, each of us has an opportunity to take part in making history and building the future of our children and grandchildren. The objective of the first stage is to create the biggest international movement, which will involve over 200 million people, the CWT movement. United, we can accomplish many great things. Together, we can change the world. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. John Maynard Keynes. PRIZM, Advanced Cryptocurrency. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed." Indeed, even 60 years after the death of this great philosopher and politician, few things have changed in the world. The market economy is in gridlock as it has exhausted itself. Now millions of people are able to understand this. The economy should have a goal, such as the development of humanity and society, to which the economy should be a servant. However, the market is not capable of goal setting. The best that it can do is to self-organize in order to extract maximum profits. But this, in the end, is a destructive goal. In order to achieve profit, mankind does not develop, but on the contrary, degenerates. All the vices of mankind, whose representatives are ready to unleash wars and organize revolutions because of the colored pieces of fiat paper, are manifested on this path this way. We don't need this. Profitability is entirely for the sake of control over resources, the usage of which endeavors toward maximum profits. Thus, you can get it only if you are a monopolist, or you manage to minimize the cost of raw materials and wages, considering them as slaves to your system. If such an approach is acceptable at the state level, conditions in business shouldn't perplex us. The producers are not interested in making their goods tasty or useful. It is not profitable for the doctor to heal the patient, while the automakers haven't produced really reliable cars for a long time. Humanity does not use the resources of the planet rationally at all. Instead, they misallocate them. Instead of switching to renewable energy, we continue to burn millions of tons of oil and gas, pushing ourselves to the brink of the abyss, which is already too close. Millions of people do despised or absolutely useless work, for which they are nonetheless paid. Should they stop being paid? No. Otherwise, the sharing economy will be in the deepest crisis. Although it will be quite possible to do without this artificial employment by introducing the so-called basic universal income, which, by the way, is already discussed in Switzerland and Sweden. Do not think that people will start to go crazy from their idleness. You can always develop yourself as well as educate your children and grandchildren. In the end, people will have time for creativity and socially significant deeds. Moreover, this goal is achievable. We have the power to create a completely different economy in which people will not need a mediator in the form of money between their desires and their embodiment. How can we do it? You would be surprised, but the recipe is quite simple. It is enough to unite several 100,000 people in order to promote a new, worldwide, decentralized financial system in competition with the existing one, so that the previous one will crack at the seams. The ideology of CWT is the core around which this consolidation is to occur, while to date the new cryptocurrency PRIZM is the only tool which can help achieve this goal. The IMF Pyramid. As mentioned above, cash flows can be represented in the form of a classic pyramid. It starts at the very top. Fiat money is printed by the Federal Reserve and the central banks, and then redistributed between the lower levels of the structure. The problem is that the money becomes more expensive at each subsequent level. The money arrives at the IMF from a limited number of large banks that either give it to people in the form of loans or pay for labor costs. Wage work or a loan is the main means of obtaining money from the people at the bottom of the pyramid. In other words, they exchange their present time, work, or their future time, loan, for money. The reason the situation is a cynical one is that time is a limited resource that people can only exchange until it runs out, while colored pieces of paper can be printed in unlimited amount for as long as you like. What the banks are doing with ordinary people, the IMF is doing with whole countries. Central banks of 189 IMF member states manage the issue of national currencies via the currency board regime. This is necessary because any country which is an IMF member is obliged to ensure a one-stage exchange of the entire volume of its national currency to dollars and pounds from its own gold and currency reserves. At all times, this rule must be followed. Without this, they cannot be accepted members of the IMF. As a result, there is not as much money in the economy of these countries as is necessary for normal operation, but rather there are enough dollars in the member central bank's vault. The more dollars were earned by selling oil and gas, the more can be printed in your own national currency. Thus, the entire economy of these countries is artificially held in direct dependence on the export of natural resources, goods and services. As a shining example, we can consider the interrelationships of the main institutions of the economy of Russia, which incidentally are identical for all 189 IMF member countries. Functions and powers provided for by the Constitution of the Russian Federation and the Federal Law on the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, which is Bank of Russia, are as follows. The Bank of Russia exists independently of federal bodies of state power, state authorities of the subjects of the Russian Federation, and local self-government bodies. The independence of the status of the Bank of Russia is reflected in Article 75 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation, as well as in Articles 1 and 2 of the Federal Law on the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, Bank of Russia. The central bank is a legal entity which is independent of the state. Only the Central Bank of the Russian Federation has an exclusive right to issue cash and organize cash circulation. Without the permission of the Bank of Russia, the state cannot dispose of property, much less the country's gold and currency reserves. The state is not responsible for the obligations of the Bank of Russia, while the Bank of Russia is responsible for the obligations of the state. The relationship of currencies is regulated by the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, irrespective of the government of the Russian Federation. The Bank of Russia has the right to apply for the protection of its interests in international courts, courts of foreign states, as well as arbitration courts. The Bank of Russia in the financial sphere can issue regulations and give instructions on what to do, both to government authorities and to legal and physical bodies. Thus, everyone must unquestionably follow them. The Bank of Russia has no right to grant loans to the government of the Russian Federation, but it can lend to economies of other countries. It is almost impossible to dismiss the chairman of the Bank of Russia until his term has expired, even if he does his job or simply refuses to comply with government orders. The IMF is the only organization whose instructions the central bank must follow. In addition to the above mentioned, the IMF solves an important issue when driving the countries into the pyramid of debts in such a way that the country will never get out of it and relinquish its state sovereignty. Just imagine the situation when the bank that issued you a loan to extend the term of the loan sets a condition that your son does not go to college but to vocational school. Each of the next conditions can be even tougher and even more cynical, up to the compulsory limitation of the population of countries under the cover of various medical programs. Of course, this doesn't help anyone in the world. Attempts to break or reformat the existing system are made regularly, but because of their disparity, they are each time broken against the defensive bastions of the world's financial elites, which very jealously guard their conquered positions. 10 years ago, an attempt was made, which initially had every chance to succeed. Of course, we're talking about the appearance of cryptocurrencies, which violated the monopoly of the Federal Reserve and the central banks for control of the money issue. As everyone knows, Bitcoin was the pioneer, owing to a person enveloped in a shroud of mystery, Satoshi Nakamoto. To date, in general, there are about 2,000 cryptocurrencies in the world. Some of them are very similar to the pioneer cryptocurrency. Others are struggling to differentiate themselves from it. Anyway, it would be a very big mistake to judge any of them. Unfortunately, even those who consider themselves experts in this field do not see any fundamental differences between the currently existing coins. For many of them, the words cryptocurrency and Bitcoin are generally synonymous. It's important to understand that any cryptocurrency is, first of all, a blockchain technology, that is, mathematics, which in turn can be used for anything. As far as a nuclear bomb differs from a nuclear power plant, cryptocurrencies can conceptually differ from each other. The source code of cryptocurrency is a rule, while the rules are written by people, laying down any goals, tasks, and ideology in them. I am convinced that these rules should contribute to the development of man and society, but unfortunately, this is not what everyone thinks, considering the main goal of any endeavor is to maximize profit. During the period since the appearance of fiat money, and to date, the most profitable business is seigniorage. And in order to understand the essence of this process, you need to understand the terminology. Fiat money, from Latin fiat, a decree, so let it be instruction. We see it from the name that this kind of money is produced by those who take responsibility for ensuring their nominal value. Simply speaking, the value of fiat money is supported by the belief of people that they will be able to exchange money for something valuable. Only the faith in green sheets of paper determines their value relative to the orange sheets of paper. Having understood this fact, one can draw a simple conclusion. Any equivalent in the form of paper, metal coins, or electronic records has value only if the established systems of upbringing and education instill in the mind of each person that these special sheets of paper have the mystical property of converting to goods and services. In this sense, any existing cryptocurrency is no worse and no better than traditional money, since in the first and in the second case, a lot of things depend on people's simple trust. The foundation of the US dollar's dominance in the world financial system is no better. Seigniorage, a French word that means income derived from the issue of money and assigned by the issuer on the right of ownership. when money is made from a material that has value below the value of the bills being produced. Cryptocurrency is a kind of digital currency, the issue and control of which are based on cryptographic methods. The operation of such systems is based on blockchain technology. Information about the transactions of all users is not encrypted and is available in clear text. A key feature of the cryptocurrency is the possibility of issuing new money and the absence of any internal or external administrator. Therefore, banks, tax, judicial and other public or private bodies cannot influence the transactions of any participants in the payment system. The transfer of cryptocurrency is irreversible, as no one can cancel, block, or dispute transactions. Considering these simple terms, one can ask the question: how will life on the planet change if the business of producing money is transferred from private structures that have concentrated control over education and the media to everyone according to birthright? How will the world financial pyramid that has been in creation for centuries remain intact if the right to issue banknotes turns out to be not only for the small omnipotent upper tier of financial tycoons who usurped power over the world, but also among ordinary people? What will happen if the Federal Reserve's monopoly on printing dollars and pounds falls down, and there will be their own small printing machine in the pocket of any inhabitant of the earth, fully providing their basic needs? This will revolutionize the entire system, while PRIZM will provide this coup. Cryptocurrency Revolution. The end of the 2020s is rightfully called the cryptocurrency revolution. But very few people understand what is hidden behind. Everyone is screaming about decentralization, Bitcoin, as well as the legalization of cryptocurrencies, but nobody can clearly explain what is hidden by these terms and where the current processes take place. Cryptocurrency has one amazing feature which almost all people have overlooked, and which has not yet revealed its potential, but it can do this in the very near future. When this happens, the consequences will shake the whole world, as well as contain changes which will affect every aspect of social life. The true strength of cryptocurrency is the ability to create and distribute money without centralized power. Perhaps this will seem obvious, but I assure you that it is not true. The world financial system has been in the hands of private financial elites for more than 100 years. The blockchain technology could pull the power out of these hands. This would open the door to a new world economy, leaving the old world order with a deficit economy in the pages of history books. After all, money is also a commodity and it also fights for its buyers. Now, cryptocurrency has every chance to defeat fiat money. The genie broke out of the lamp and we can see the greatest global financial experiment that can give a second life to both trade and the world economy by simply eliminating the fraudulent unlimited emission of currency from the rules of the game. But is the complete and unconditional surrender of today's monetary monopolists possible without any serious resistance? Is it possible to believe that people will give up everything that for centuries provided for their comfortable existence and gave unlimited power without any struggle? Did they at some point attempt to channel it in the right direction, and did this attempt succeed in realizing that they are not able to stop the cryptocurrency revolution? Looking at what is happening today with the world's most famous cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, the answers to these questions are far from obvious. Meanwhile, Satoshi Nakamoto's creation is surrounded by no fewer myths than the creator. Myth number 1. Bitcoin is eternal. Everything that is written in the blockchain is left in it forever. Indeed, each high-grade client of the network stores the entire history of all transactions. Therefore, its volume at the time of writing this book already amounts to more than 200 gigabytes of data. Thus, this is less than the volume of the hard drive of a budget laptop. But the more transactions in the Bitcoin network occur, the faster the amount of data grows. Most of it appeared in the last couple of years. The growth of the volume of the blockchain. Bitcoin was lucky, as the volume of the blockchain of its main competitor, Ethereum, grows exponentially, and at the time of writing this book, its volume amounts to more than 4 terabytes. So, according to the current realities, the eternity of the blockchain is limited to 10 years, as the growth in the capacity of hard disk drives is definitely not keeping up with the increase in the amount of data. So, according to the current realities, the eternity of the blockchain is limited to 10 years, as the growth in the capacity of hard disk drives is definitely not keeping up with the increase in the amount of data. But in addition to the fact that these arrays need to be stored, they must also be downloaded. Everyone who tried to use a full-fledged local wallet for any cryptocurrency was amazed to find that they cannot make and accept payments until all the specified amount is downloaded and verified. You'll be very lucky if everything goes through in just a couple of days. So, Bitcoin users divided a long time ago into enthusiasts who download the blockchain and ordinary people who use online wallets, trust the server, and who do not care how it works in general. Thus, the system is gradually centered and ceases to be decentralized. Myth number 2. Bitcoin is effective and scalable, therefore ordinary money will soon die out. If each node of the network produces the same work, then it is obvious that the bandwidth of the entire network is equal to the bandwidth of one node. And do you know what it is equal to? Bitcoin can process no more than 10 transactions per second for everyone. In addition, Bitcoin blockchain transactions are recorded only once every 10 minutes. And after the appearance of the record for reliability, it is acceptable to wait another 50 minutes because the records regularly spontaneously roll back. Now imagine that you want to buy bread for Bitcoin. Literally, it will take an hour of waiting in the store and the coveted but stale bread is in your hand. During this time, speculators on exchanges may drop or raise the rate of Bitcoin by a few %, so it is not clear at what price you will get this bread in the end. Do not forget about the commission for the transaction, which can be unpleasantly large. In the whole scope of frameworks, this is ridiculous. When Bitcoin is used by a handful of people. For comparison, Visa processes thousands of operations per second, and if necessary, it will easily increase capacity because classical banking technologies are perfectly scalable. Myth number 3. Miners provide network security. You've probably heard about the miners and the giant mining farms that are built next to power plants. What are they doing? If shortly, they use electricity in the 24/7 mode with periodicity in 10 minutes, transform the blocks until they become beautiful and can be included in the block. As a reward for each new block, its creator receives 12.5 Bitcoin. At the end of June 2018, 1 Bitcoin cost about $7,000. By the way, the only way to issue Bitcoin is to be awarded for the creation of blocks. Thus, all new Bitcoin is created thanks to mining, which spends the same amount of electricity as an entire city with a population of 200,000 inhabitants. Add to this the insanely expensive equipment, which is suitable only for mining, and you will come to the obvious idea that people are unlikely to get rich on mining. At best, it will be possible to return the money invested in the equipment and make a small profit. However, it is not certain because the mining equipment is becoming obsolete very quickly and it needs to be updated much more often than home computers. Sellers of mining equipment promise a payback period of 6 months, but they, as a rule, never make a correction for the growth of the computation complexity and, as a consequence, a drop in the extraction efficiency. In reality, no farm pays off in a year from inception unless, of course, it retains its capacity for work. From an economic point of view, the money spent on purchasing equipment for mining would be more appropriate spent on buying cryptocurrency. Calling things by their own names, the basic principle of mining, the so-called proof of work, is identical with the notion of burning the resources of mankind. This empty work and numerous cryptocurrencies working on POS technology perfectly illustrate this thesis. Everything operates without monstrous energy costs in purchasing mining farms. Blockchain optimists like to say that the miners are not useless. They ensure the stability and security of the Bitcoin network. This is true, but only partially, as in fact, the miners protect Bitcoin from other miners. If the number of miners was 1,000 times less and they burned 1,000 times less electricity than now, Bitcoin would have worked just as well. The speed of the appearance of new blocks as well as the number and speed of transactions would not have changed. In addition to the blockchain decisions, there is a risk of a 51% attack, the essence of which is that if someone controls more than half of all mining capacities, they can secretly write an alternative financial history in which they did not give anyone their money. Thus, an attacker gets the opportunity to spend their money several times. It turns out that Bitcoin has become a hostage of its own ideology. Superfluous miners cannot stop mining, because then probability that one of them will control more than half of the remaining capacity will sharply increase. While mining is profitable, the network is stable, but if the situation changes, for example due to the fact that the price of the electricity will rise or the financial reward for a new block will decrease again, the network may face massive double expenses. Myth number 4. Blockchain is decentralized and therefore unbreakable. You may think that since a block is stored on each node of the network, the government agencies cannot outlaw Bitcoin because it doesn't have a central server or anything to that effect. But this is a dangerous delusion. In fact, in reality, all independent miners are pulled into cartels. They have to unite because it is better to have a stable but small income than a huge one that comes around once every 1,000 years. Distribution of Bitcoin capacities by pools. As you can see in the diagram, there are only about 20 large pools, and 4 of them control more than 50% of the total capacity. So, knocking on just 4 doors is enough to get access to 4 computers that control 50% of the Bitcoin network, making it possible to spend the same amount of Bitcoin more than once. Such an opportunity, as you may understand, will devalue Bitcoin for quite a while, and this task is quite feasible. Mining distribution by country. However, the most important threat is not this, but the fact that most pools, along with their computing power, are placed in one country, which simplifies the potential takeover of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, which had a decentralized model in the very beginning, every year becomes an increasingly centrist model in the hands of miners and market speculators. Nowadays, this scourge is a concern for absolutely all cryptocurrencies because all of them are conceptually very similar. They all have a common problem. Even if they are created with the intention of being decentralized, after they start to grow, they become centralized, similar to the way Bitcoin is. In order to generate a new coin, for example Bitcoin, you need to choose a pair of prime numbers thanks to which the block is generated, i.e. if you generated a new block in the blockchain, the genesis block gives you a coin as a reward, sending it to your address. Almost all cryptocurrencies operate on this principle. In order to generate a new coin, it is necessary to maintain the network. Mining maintains the whole network. In fact, the miners do not engage in Bitcoin production, they just generate blocks in the blockchain and get Bitcoin as a reward. This concept leads to centralization. At the initial stage, there are a lot of miners, as mining is easy. It's easy to generate blocks as well as maintain the network, which is stable and well protected both in the POW and POS concepts. However, with the increasing complexity of POW networks, the miners have to constantly buy more powerful equipment in order to continue to be able to efficiently generate new blocks in the blockchain. As not so many people can afford it, the competition is reduced. The situation in the classic POS concept is not much better. Thus, you need to have coins to generate new blocks. The more coins you have, the more blocks you produce, and vice versa. The more blocks you produce, the more coins you receive. Respectively, you become stronger, therefore it gets harder to compete with you. If you don't sell your coins to anyone, then you become a key person in the whole network. Thus, all of the blockchains operate on this principle and are evolving from decentralized to centralized. The more power is needed for POW mining and POS coins, the closer these systems are to final centralization and capture. Thus, the decentralization of cryptocurrencies is an illusion. In fact, every cryptocurrency has an owner, while in most cases no one knows who the owners are. The thesis of centralizing Bitcoin is perfectly illustrated in the following data. 99% of all Bitcoin currently used is stored in 1% of wallets. Moreover, there are only 114 wallets in the world which store 10,000 Bitcoin or more. The total value of these wallets is about $20 billion. More than 1,000 Bitcoin is stored in a little more than 1,600 wallets. In addition, no more than 3% of the Bitcoin accounts around the world can boast of storing at least one Bitcoin in each. The remaining 97% are satisfied at best with tenths of this cryptocurrency. By the way, Satoshi Nakamoto's account is at the top of this pyramid, as it stores more than 1 million Bitcoin, which have never been transferred. Myth number 5. The anonymity and openness of the blockchain is good. The blockchain is open, as any user can track all transactions. However, there is no and cannot be any anonymity in the Bitcoin network. As an example, if an attacker requires a ransom for a hacked wallet, then everyone understands that the wallet belongs to a malevolent person. For the reason that anyone can track the transactions from this wallet, the hacker cannot simply take advantage of Bitcoin stored inside, because once his identity is revealed, he would be thrown in jail. Moreover, almost all exchanges require passing through identification when exchanging cryptocurrency for fiat money. Therefore, hackers use the so-called mixer, which mixes dirty money with a large amount of clean money, i.e. laundering it. The hacker pays a large commission for this and takes a big risk, because the mixer is either anonymous and you run the risk of losing your money, or is under the control of influential people who can give him up to the authorities. However, pseudonymity is bad not only for criminals, but also for generally law-abiding citizens. Here is a simple example. I'm transferring to my mother a small amount of Bitcoin. After that, she would be able to know how much money I have in general, most importantly, how much exactly I spent during my whole life, what I bought, how much roulette I played, as well as which politicians I anonymously supported. Likewise, if I repaid a debt to a friend for a glass of lemonade, then he would know everything about my financial condition. It's obvious this is nonsense. In this case, you can make your credit card's financial history openly available for everyone. If some individuals were to accept this, it would spell certain death for many companies. All their counterparties, purchases, sales, customers, the volume of accounts and everything else would become public. So the openness of finance is one of Bitcoin's serious shortcomings in the eyes of many people. Chasing the leader. In the United States, it is common to consider a currency as a commodity, while the absence of VAT does not cause major problems for either miners or cryptocurrency users. In 2016, US courts decided to recognize the cryptocurrency as a means of payment, with the use of which corresponding legal consequences appear aimed at legalizing the proceeds of crime. The state of New York has introduced a special license called the New York Bit License, regulating certain types of activities, namely mining and exchange. Likewise, in Vermont, a bill is being drafted, according to which smart contracts will become legally binding. In the European Union, the cryptocurrency is considered primarily as a means of payment without being taxed, which is welcomed by startup companies and in particular by mining companies. However, it is not entirely true to say that the US, EU, and China have become the leaders of the cryptocurrency market only at the expense of the active policy of their governments. Rather, this result was achieved through the efforts of large private capital and big investors. For a long time, the authorities of the countries mentioned above have tried to prohibit cryptocurrency, in particular Bitcoin, but it did not work out. As a result, they have changed their tactics, trying to establish control over Bitcoin and to make the cryptocurrency turnover as adjustable as possible. Russia follows the same path, but has lagged behind the leaders by a couple of years. This lag was formed due to the fact that they didn't take Bitcoin and cryptocurrency seriously for a long time, as well as the fact that there was no qualified center for analysis and decision-making on this issue. However, most likely, that situation hasn't changed today. At the same time, the issue of cryptocurrency should be considered in a comprehensive way, from the side of national security, return of state and financial sovereignty, as well as geopolitics. Only such an approach will allow us to make a correct, balanced and conscious decision. Thus, the decision must be taken as soon as possible, because China, in my opinion, will continue to vigorously take the initiative concerning the cryptocurrency market. This will mostly be due to the fact that the main part of the factories for the production of mining equipment are located on the territory of China and the countries of Southeast Asia. For some people, it may be a revelation. Not miners, but producers and sellers of mining equipment receive a majority of the income from mining business. The prime cost of this metal equipment is 10 times lower than its selling price. This super profit is invested in the increase of production and mining capacities in China, as well as the purchase of Bitcoin, which leads to a further increase in its price. Here is an indicative detail. Chinese miners work on the most advanced and efficient equipment over the course of several months and only then begin to sell it to other countries. This approach allows them to constantly keep competitors at a respectful distance, increasing their influence in this market. It is impossible to prohibit cryptocurrency in any one country. This is as absurd as banning the internet or rain outside the window. That's why the central bank and regulators, despite their huge desire, are failing in their struggle with cryptocurrencies. To date, the list of countries where Bitcoin is banned includes Nepal, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Bangladesh. I'm not sure that anyone wants to get on this list. Even if you prohibit the turnover of cryptocurrency, the targets set by the regulator will not be achieved anyway. Some of the market players will certainly switch to other assets, but the majority will not give up their favorite things and simply go into the shadows, consciously becoming violators of the law. In fact, people lobbying laws to ban cryptocurrency deliberately push people to commit crime, and nobody knows why. At least it will be very easy to catch such criminals in the future, as they can be easily manipulated. On the other hand, the legalization of cryptocurrencies means the state's surrender to a global speculative business. In fact, private money flows into the country. At the same time, I understand why many countries easily give up part of their state sovereignty associated with the issuance of their own banknotes. They just didn't have it in the first place. Let's create our own cryptocurrency. I think that in the current situation, compared with Bitcoin, countries need to create a truly decentralized cryptocurrency without binding it to the state. This cryptocurrency should not only technically surpass Bitcoin in terms of speed, cost of transactions, as well as bandwidth, but as it develops, it should become more decentralized than Bitcoin. By massively surpassing Bitcoin's features, such a new cryptocurrency will overtake the primary cryptocurrency and will become popular throughout the world. In addition, we need to draft a law not to prohibit cryptocurrency, but to regulate its market. It will become necessary to license crypto exchanges and exchangers through which the cryptocurrency is to be exchanged to fiat money. It is the creation of a favorable condition for the work of international exchanges and exchangers that will not only attract investment, but will also reduce the risks to crypto users with the exclusion of fraud. The requirement to verify and identify users of crypto exchanges and exchangers will help to solve the problems related to terrorism and money laundering. In addition, we can obligate crypto exchanges and exchangers not to be bound to Visa, but to national payment system, thus popularizing them. Such an integrated approach to resolving this problem will allow the country's financial systems to be under state control. Personally, I evaluate the prospects of Bitcoin as very vague for a variety of reasons. However, this doesn't mean that those who have already gotten involved in the struggle for it, as well as those who have managed to invest big money, according to macroeconomic measures, in this arms race, must back down from the struggle for control of this cryptocurrency. Success in this field cannot be achieved by acting according to the established rules of the game. But if we concentrate our efforts on the production of our own mining equipment, then anything is possible. Big players aiming at succeeding in the battle for Bitcoin need to build national factories for the production of chips and video cards, rather than buying old things at an inflated price from China. It's important that in terms of productivity and cost, such equipment outperforms its advanced Chinese counterparts. The provision of industrial plants, for example nuclear power plants, and special electricity tariffs will lead to an increase in investment in these projects from around the world, offering the ability to attract the mining farms which have already procured such equipment. On the basis of these mining farms, it will be possible to create the world's largest mining pool. Only such an integrated approach will allow us to compete with other countries in the mining and control of Bitcoin. ICO boom. One of the areas of development in blockchain technology is the so-called ICO, Initial Coin Offering. ICO works on a principle similar to an IPO. Investors investing funds get a company's share. The main difference is that conducting an ICO, the investor does not receive real shares, but becomes the owner of cryptographic tokens, which are traded on crypto exchanges for various cryptocurrencies. Roughly speaking, tokens don't depend on shares or any other form of ownership. Calling things by their proper names, in 99% of cases, the ICO teams sell nothing to their investors, or rather the hope of making a profit. It's important to understand that in the majority of cases, people offering the ICO promise a ridiculous profit percentage to those who decide to invest in their project. In 2017, it was appropriate to talk about profitability in excess of Bitcoins or Ethereums. However, such a rate of return is unbelievable in the real world. Not even the most successful legally operating business can provide a 20-fold increase in investment. And even if they could, why would they then seek profit through an ICO investment? Any classical credit organization will loan much more money at an incommensurably smaller percentage for such a project. Therefore, the fact that almost all the ICOs started in 2017 have not lasted up until the new year is absolutely unsurprising. You should also note that during the ICO, the so-called bubble effect may appear because of the excessively high interest in this method of obtaining financial infusions into a business. The main risks are fraud and loss of investment capital due to the opacity of the cryptocurrency market. Nowadays, this is the main problem of any ICO, which limits the effective use of this tool. People believe that the risks can be reduced with the introduction of state regulation of the cryptocurrency market. In addition to government regulation, the risk in the ICO field can be affected by the entry of large market players with not only a reputation, but also physical assets in the form of finished goods and income, which are extremely important in the face of economic sanctions from the USA and the European Union. Nevertheless, ICO is a very effective tool for attracting investment into Russia. The most appropriate way is to attract funds into operating enterprises that require investments, in particular for expansion of production. Manifesto. Almost 10 years have passed since the appearance of the first cryptocurrency, which, according to the plan of the creator, aims at becoming a convenient and anonymous means of payment. It could replace money, but there are forces in the world for which this monetary unit is a threat to their established positions at the top of the global governance system. In order not to waste energy in combating this phenomenon, the power of which repeatedly exceeds the existing world financial system, the minds and attention of people who have understood the power of cryptocurrency have instead been deployed in the opposite direction. Cryptocurrency has evolved from a means of payment into an investment tool. It lost its power in the speculative struggle on the exchanges. The race of mining capacities has led to the fact that now, in order to pay for a cup of coffee worth $1 with Bitcoin, you need to pay about 25 cents to the miners to confirm this transaction. The high cost of transactions is a problem for absolutely all top cryptocurrencies. The greed of stock speculators and miners is the scourge of Bitcoin. So the world's elites were able to subdue something that cannot be defeated. To date, before it's too late, people have to correct the situation and consider cryptocurrencies as a convenient and anonymous means of payment, as well as a ready means to fully replace the existing monetary system. Change is possible. The PRIZM's concept is this reversal. PRIZM. PRIZM is the development of the CWT social movement, as well as the result of the work of a very strong, if not to say the strongest, international group of programmers whose names I cannot disclose right now due to security concerns. PRIZM does not have an issuing center and can be used as an absolutely transparent, using the blockchain, and decentralized means of payment. The advantages of PRIZM compared to Bitcoin are obvious. PRIZM's speed of transaction does not exceed 1 minute. Bandwidth is not limited, as well as the minimum commission amounts to 0.5% of the transfer amount, but not more than 10 PRIZM, i.e. when transferring $1 million through the PRIZM system from one place of the world to another, the fee will be charged in the amount of only $10. Due to the technical implementation of the concept of issuing new coins different from other cryptocurrencies, PRIZM becomes even more decentralized during its development. You can check the open source at github.com/prismspace/PRIZMcore. PRIZM's mission is to carry out a smooth transition from the world financial system based on the US dollar to crypto economics, i.e. the future economy based on blockchain. PRIZM uses both blockchain technology and the NXT core, which has been completely redesigned in the process of project development. As a result, a unique paramining mechanism was implemented, where the emission of new coins does not depend on the mining or forging process as it does in all other cryptocurrencies that use proof of work and proof of stake. In the PRIZM system, the emission of new coins is carried out in an absolutely decentralized manner in the wallets of all users of the network at the same time. Thanks to this, as the network develops with the genesis of the wallet, new coins are allocated to an increasing number of addresses. Thus, over time, PRIZM increasingly expands and becomes increasingly decentralized. The speed of creating new coins depends on two factors. In the paramining mechanism, elements of marketing based on the blockchain are used. Due to this, the network can develop itself, expanding and involving more users, similar to a social virus. PRIZM will never become a centralized model like Bitcoin or POS currencies. The installation of nodes and the creation of blocks are currently available to every user on their personal computers. Therefore, this mechanism will not become complicated in the future. PRIZM paramining is unique and has been realized for the first time. In the PRIZM cryptocurrency, all the defects are completely eliminated, while all the advantages of other worlds' currencies are realized. Since its launch, February 17th, 2017, the team has managed not only to prove the viability of the project in an aggressive environment, but also its prospects and long-term viability. An interesting fact about PRIZM is that it was one of the only cryptocurrencies in the world that did not follow the downward price trend of Bitcoin in fiat currency. I'm pretty sure that PRIZM will not only catch up with Bitcoin in terms of capitalization and the number of users, but it will also surpass it, since it surpasses all of its technical parameters, as first and foremost, the project was created as a convenient and modern international payment tool. We created PRIZM because, to date, no one has created any cryptocurrency which allows to print and distribute money without a centralized force, and which, as it develops, becomes even more decentralized, while also due to the low cost of transactions, making it possible to use as a full payment tool. To date, not many people are willing to pay 20 to 25 cents for a quick transaction through Bitcoin or Ethereum for a cup of coffee worth $1. Almost all existing cryptocurrencies are forks or tokens based on the Ethereum blockchain system. PRIZM is neither one nor the other because it was created in another programming language, Java, while Bitcoin and its forks are created using C++. PRIZM is infinitely far from the POW concept, but POS is not close to PRIZM either. The fact is that the legendary Satoshi Nakamoto understood the first part of the cryptocurrency revolution as meaning to be able to print money. However, he did not fully deal with the issue of the possibility of distributing this money, which, in fact, is the most important piece of the puzzle. This oversight has created a critical vulnerability in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Instead of spreading money around the world, the system has replaced central banks with a group of miners who have created chaos in the system, delaying necessary software improvements by years, such as SegWit, and threatening with meaningless hard forks to speculate and buy more coins for a low price. As a result, Bitcoin's initial decentralized model became more concentrated in the hands of miners and stock speculators each year. Thus, an absolutely new system has been designed on the basis of the PRIZM cryptocurrency that will once and for all change the world financial and economic environment. The secret is how to distribute money at the time of its creation and further transmission. It is necessary to select pairs of prime numbers in 99.9% of the existing cryptocurrencies in order to unlock a new coin, thanks to which a block is generated, for which the Genesis block gives you a coin as a reward. In PRIZM, everything is fundamentally different. The issue of coins does not depend on the generation of blocks in the blockchain. In fact, foragers are enthusiasts who support the network in an operational mode and do not generate new coins. They simply receive a fixed commission from the transactions that were recorded in the block they created. The generation of coins is made to all users simultaneously, which leads to an even greater decentralization. It's impossible to accumulate coins with a margin of 50% in one place. The more users join the system, the more the network is segmented, the more the need to generate new coins, distributing them to a larger number of addresses. To generate more coins, users are forced not only to keep coins, but also distribute them to their followers, popularizing the system and leading it to even greater decentralization. In fact, the generation of coins is made for storage, regardless of whether you create new blocks or not. Generation of coins is made on the available balance. To date, there is not any cryptocurrency in the world in which the function of generating new coins would be divided from the function of generating new units and maintaining the blockchain network. PRIZM is the only cryptocurrency for now in which the block and the generation of coins are different sides of the same coin. Only such an approach will subsequently preserve the original concept of a decentralized, open, and transparent financial instrument controlled by a huge number of users. To date, PRIZM is indeed the only cryptocurrency in which the problem of 51% is solved. And we will tell you how. First, we implement pre-mining with small amounts for the largest possible number of participants. We don't need investors, but partners who can spread PRIZM in their country to as many users as possible. Thus, we solve the problem of maximum decentralization. We don't leave anything for ourselves because we don't want to be the Achilles heel of the system. Unlike Satoshi Nakamoto, we are living, breathing humans who have created an absolutely decentralized financial tool. Secondly, even if some moneybags will try to buy a large quantity of PRIZM, it will be very difficult to do, as PRIZM's price goes up as demand increases. Due to the limited number of PRIZM in circulation, as well as its uniqueness, people are unlikely to be willing to spend it. In turn, this can only lead to an even greater increase in the number of new participants and the scaling of the network. In any case, the most important thing is that there will be chains of participants over moneybags who try to buy PRIZM. The increase in personal balance will accelerate, above all, the speed of paramining, issuing new coins, of those who take over moneybags. Practically, this will allow moneybags to receive more income, but they will not be able to take control over the system, as its weight and influence will only decrease. Postface. The few who thereof something really learned, unwisely frank, with hearts that spurned concealing, and to the mob laid bare each thought and feeling, have evermore been crucified and burned. Goethe, Faust. On May 18th, 2017, in the United States, Jacques Fresco died when he was 102 years old. The death of this great man has become a loss for many millions of people who dreamed of a better world and aimed at changing it. Jacques Fresco is the author of the concept of the resource-oriented economy and the founder of the Venus Project. As many people said, Jacques Fresco was a contemporary of Albert Einstein in the full sense of the word, as he also devoted most of his life to solving the urgent problems of society and working on the creation of cities of the future. The concept of the resource-oriented economy of Jacques Fresco formed the basis of the CWT ideology as an alternative to the existing world economy created on capitalism and making a profit. Someone will say that this is not ideal, but certainly better than what we now see in society. The CWT movement will do everything possible to continue the work started by Jacques Fresco, less than a year after Jacques Fresco died. On March 26, 2018, another brilliant man, Sergei Mavrodi, has passed away too. He was one of the first to not only dare to openly talk about the injustice of the existing world financial system, but also struggled against it. With his financial pyramid, he demonstrated the principle of the world financial pyramid of bankers based on the US dollar. It showed ordinary people how the world's financial elites make money out of nothing. He brought up a huge number of young leaders in many countries who are engaged now in politics, business, or finance with one goal: to change the world and to give ordinary people financial freedom. He has gone, but his ideas live and continue to change our world. We are living in a very precarious time, a time of global changes and new opportunities for every citizen on our only planet. Global changes can be interesting and positive, but dangerous and unpredictable at the same time. There is no common understanding between people, and there is no common goals and direction toward a better world. Today, the people's thinking is locked onto their personal consumption and their plans to increase this consumption. The results never lead to an improvement of the quality of life for the person or the society in general. We live within a ruthless and bloody war, a war which is conducted between global corporations and supranational governing structures, and the victims are the entire human population. This is no longer a conspiracy theory. If you have observed and analyzed the nature of military conflicts for the last century alone, you would have realized that the basis of all these wars, cold and hot, cyber or drone, is related to money. The so-called currency wars and their impacts on the value of the domestic currency do not reflect the potential of the real material base and the true resources that belong to state and citizens. The irony here is that there will not be any real winners rising out from these currency wars. The collapse of this system will lead to a profound devaluation of all the resources and tools that could be otherwise used for our prosperity. Moreover, as a result of these wars, the question about the future of our existence within this system has become an urgent world conversation. On this basis, the greatest potential lies not in more investments in hydrocarbon production, gold mining, or expensive high technology and defense systems, but in the common interest and life-nurturing resources and tools for people. Investment in the development of our common interest in all the creative fields, and in a new, more sustainable education for our children. Over the years, many politicians, human rights defenders and social activists are trying to find the answer to one question: how do we achieve peace on earth? The answer has so obviously been in completely changing our financial system. What is the modern monetary system? First of all, its destiny was predetermined at the time of its creation. Like everything in this world, it went through the phase of birth, growth and prosperity, and now we are inevitably witnessing its death. This natural process is irreversible. We can't stop it, but only prolong the agony of its death throes, trying to make it live on, even if it's to our detriment. Do not waste your energy on trying to hoard and wait in some illusionary safe haven. It's not going to work. This storm will reach everyone. There is no insurance that will cover the damage this storm will bring. There is a way out of this situation: to create a new financial model, a model which will be transparent and understandable and fair to each and every person, to create a unit of value to account for what we do, attached to the real value of material products, and reflect the true value of the goods and services we transact. A new currency should be introduced that is fully decentralized and not bound to national control and interest. People who use this new currency should be responsible for its emission. Everyone should be able to release as much money as they can provide by their goods, services, or other efforts to develop the new settlement system. This is the only way we can take the control back from global corporations and governmental agencies. By the time the global financial system offers the world a new, independent, and effective operating tool, this system will have already gained its freedom from the government and big business, who would otherwise keep it subservient to global governance in the form of uncontrolled central banks. With this change, they will fail to influence people through a controlled media circus. Corporations will lose their profit incentives and opportunities, and what will be the end of an unjust financial system that creates money based on unsecured debt. Moving away from these currency wars and adopting equal control and transparency over the financial system, we will gradually reduce the risks of military conflict on the planet. This won't happen tomorrow, but if we don't do anything, then the world will continue passing through this dark tunnel into inevitable catastrophe. There's too much at stake in this pivotal time in human history. I urge you not to wait until someone comes and starts to change the world for you. It is time for us to unite and create a new financial system that will save and improve our lives. This book presents a new vision in the form of an ideology that brings people of various countries, cultures, religions, and beliefs together in one shared purpose to become free from the domination of global financial corporations. From birth, we are told what to do. You must is the mantra we are told we should live by. But in fact, it's just other people's thoughts that force us to the life of their choosing. Taking their position of I must, we choose a life for someone or something else, not for ourselves. My purpose can only occur when we cease to follow someone else's ideals and head towards our own. Only in this case we will discover our personal potential. This motto of my purpose has become the global aim for the leader of the international movement Change the World Together, or CWT, Aleksey Muratov. My purpose is to change the world, which is ruled by the elite of the world financial empire. They are always ready to start wars, organize revolutions, and drive common people into slavery for the sake of their own greed and monopoly. However, Aleksey is well aware that improving or implementing anything new without knowledge or experience is a hit-and-miss gamble. Aleksey Muratov realized that he did not want to live like most people do. At a young age, he has worked as a leading engineer at a nuclear power station in Kursk, Russia, and was the leader of a youth movement. By the age of 25, he had become the youngest deputy chairman of the City Duma to the chairman of the Permanent Commission on Economic Policy. This was not unconnected. He had a dream to help the people of his city. Soon it came to him. One couldn't change people's lives in a city, region, or country for the better unless the state had sovereignty, unless it had full independence in its internal affairs and foreign policy. Unfortunately, most countries of the world do not have that sovereignty, so the desire to rid society of the negative external influences subsequently became the basis of the CWT movement's ideology. One cannot win if the rules are constantly being changed for the benefit of who is making the changes. The rules must be the same for all participants. Aleksey Muratov tried to implement this idea by participating in Sergei Mavrody's infamous project MMM. Aleksey was engaged in the creation of political parties outside Russia. It should be noted that this was his first experience with an association of people from different countries, different cultures and religions who desired to change the rules imposed on them. However, when the Ukrainian legitimate government was overthrown in Ukraine with the help of the world's financial elite and the pro-Western puppets, Aleksey considered it his duty to come to Donbass. He realized that the background to that conflict was not a national idea by the Ukrainian people, not a desire to enter the European Union, but a threat from international corporations to start the Third World War. This would prevent Russia from further development and stop it from becoming a new superpower. That spring, Aleksey Muratov became an official representative of the Donetsk People's Republic after its proclamation in Russia. He became an active participant in the creation of a new ideology which would unite the inhabitants of Donbass. As the head of the executive committee, he is engaged in the development of the public movement Donetsk Republic, the most widespread one in the Donetsk People's Republic. After that, he started working at the central office of the People's Council, Parliament of the DPR, and Aleksey created its structure. Thus, the Ministry of Justice of the Russian Federation registered the social movement Change the World Together, CWT, on August 17, 2016. Aleksey Muratov has become the chairman of the board of the CWT.